Brandon's voice sliced through the speaker. "Dad, you're too old to understand how money works. I'm handling this so you don't blow our inheritance before your 27-year-old son, can even enjoy it." I felt the words land like a cold stone on my chest. My fingers tightened on the edge of the walnut desk, the grain biting into my palm. A faint citrus note from the diffuser on the shelf mingled with the stale scent of old paper. Outside, the city hummed low, a distant siren wailing once before fading. I forced a steady tone, trying to hide the sting. "I've booked the voyage, Brandon. All expenses paid. I thought you'd like a break from the charts and the trades." I heard the faint click of his keyboard in the background, a rapid staccato that suggested he was elsewhere, eyes glued to a screen. "You always throw money at things that don't matter," he said, his words clipped, each syllable landing like a hammer. "I'm looking out for the family. You just wasted on another pointless trip." A laugh, short and humorless, followed. "Trust me, I've got this under control." I swallowed, the acid rising in my throat. "I'm Charles Hayes, 54. An architect who designs buildings that stand for generations. I don't need a lecture on fiscal responsibility from someone who still calls his allowance income." My voice stayed even, but the words carried an edge I hadn't intended. There was a pause, then a softer note. "Sorry, Dad. I didn't mean to sound harsh. I want to make sure everything's secure." He added, "Emily's been asking about the trip. She's excited, you know." The mention of her name eased the tension a fraction, though the doubt lingered like a shadow. I ended the call and leaned back in my chair, the leather creaking under my weight. The email glowed on the screen. A glossy itinerary for a 7-day Mediterranean cruise, the price tag bold. $30,000. I had transferred the sum that morning, a gesture meant to bridge the widening gap between us. My mind flicked to the ledger on my desk, the column of numbers I'd scanned an hour earlier. A large debit caught my eye, the description vague. Internal transfer. 15,000. I frowned, the digits swimming before my vision. I could have sworn I'd authorized only the cruise payment. Perhaps I'd misread. Or perhaps a bill for materials had slipped through unnoticed. A knock at the door pulled me from my thoughts. I called, "Come in," and the door opened to reveal Brandon. His shoulders relaxed, a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. In his arms trotted a golden retriever, its fur gleaming like sunlight on wheat. Buddy nudged Brandon's leg, then glanced up at me with hopeful eyes. "Thanks for watching him, Dad," Brandon said, his tone light. "Emily had an emergency at work. She'll be back later." He set the dog down, and Buddy immediately began to sniff the rug, his nose twitching at the faint aroma of polish. I forced a smile, the muscles in my cheek tightening. "No problem. He seems friendly." I reached out, my hand hovering over the dog's head before pulling back. I wasn't fond of pets. The responsibility felt like an extra draft on an already busy schedule. Brandon settled into the visitor's chair opposite my desk, crossing his legs. He pulled a sleek tablet from his bag, tapping at it with practiced speed. "I've been reviewing the portfolio," he said, his voice dropping to a confidential register. "There's a chance to reallocate some assets, increase returns. Just a heads up." I nodded, keeping my gaze on the tablet screen where numbers flickered. "Anything specific you'd like to discuss?" I asked, trying to steer the conversation toward the cruise, the reason I'd summoned him. He glanced up, a flicker of something, calculation, crossing his face. "Actually, I wanted to talk about the legal side. There's a doctor I've been consulting, Dr. Evans. He does capacity evaluations, just in case. We want everything airtight." He tapped the tablet once more, then slid it toward me. A paper peeked from beneath the device, its top corner visible. "Legal docs. Dr. Evans." My pulse quickened. I hadn't expected any mention of legal paperwork. let alone a doctor's name linked to capacity assessments. I kept my expression neutral, inhaling the subtle scent of sandalwood from Brandon's cologne. "Is there something you think I should be aware of?" I asked, my tone measured, though curiosity prickled at the edges. He shrugged, the motion casual. "Just being thorough. Mom always said it's smart to have plans." He paused, then added, "Emily's been looking forward to seeing you on the ship. She says she'll bring her favorite scarf, the one with the blue pattern." He smiled again, this time a touch warmer. Buddy, bored with the rug, trotted over and dropped a soggy tennis ball at my feet. I stared at the damp felt, the texture oddly comforting against my palm. I bent, picking it up, and tossed it gently. The ball arced, landing with a soft thud near the door. Brandon watched the exchange, his eyes narrowing slightly. "You still got that arm, Dad?" he remarked, a hint of admiration in his voice. "Reminds me of the old days when you'd toss me a ball after work." I let out a short laugh, the sound barely audible over the hum of the air conditioner. Some things never change. I rose, moving to the window to look out at the cityscape. The late afternoon light painted the glass with gold, the distant river catching glints like scattered coins. I turned back, noting the way Brandon's fingers drummed a silent rhythm on the tablet's edge, a habit I'd seen in his mother when she was deep in thought. "Let's get you settled," I said, gesturing to the guest room down the hall. "I'll show you where you can leave your things." He stood, gathering his tablet and the paper with the legal docs. Buddy followed, his tail wagging slow, as if sensing the undercurrent beneath our polite exchange. As we walked down the hall, I caught a whiff of something metallic from the kitchen, a faint trace of blood, perhaps from a cut Brandon had gotten earlier. I dismissed it as imagination, focusing instead on the steady rhythm of his steps beside me. The hallway lights flickered overhead, casting brief shadows that stretched and retracted with each step. We reached the guest room, and I opened the door, revealing a neatly made bed, a small desk, and a window that overlooked the backyard. Brandon set his belongings down, slipping the legal document into the drawer of the nightstand. He glanced at me, his expression unreadable. "Thanks, Dad," he said, his voice softer now. "I'll try not to be a bother." I nodded, feeling the weight of the day settle on my shoulders. "Just let me know if you need anything." I stepped back, closing the door softly behind me. The click of the latch sounded final, though I knew the night was only beginning. I returned to my office, the leather chair sighing as I sank into it. The email for the cruise still glowed, a promise of open sea and endless horizons. I pulled the drawer open, my hand hovering over the legal paper. Curiosity warred with caution. I wanted to know what Dr. Evans had to say, yet I feared opening a door best left shut. A sudden buzz from my phone shattered the silence. I glanced at the screen. An unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. "Mr. Hayes?" a voice asked, crisp and official. "This is Detective Langford from the precinct. We received a report concerning a possible fraud attempt linked to a recent large transfer from your account. May we ask a few questions?" My stomach dropped. The transfer I'd noticed earlier, the vague internal transfer, now took on a sinister shade. I felt the chair beneath me shift, as if the very foundations of my trust were being tested. "Of course," I replied, keeping my tone even despite the sudden surge of adrenaline. "What do you need to know?" The detective began to speak, but before she could finish, a sharp crash echoed from the guest room down the hall. I sprang to my feet, heart pounding, and rushed toward the source. The door stood ajar, the room in disarray. The nightstand drawer lay open, its contents scattered. Papers, a pen, the legal document now lying face up on the floor. Buddy stood near the doorway, his ears flattened, a low whine escaping his throat. In the center of the room, Brandon's tablet lay cracked, its screen spider-webbed with lines of damage. I stared at the scene, the legal papers heading stark in the dim light. "Legal docs, Dr. Evans. A single sentence was visible, barely legible. Evaluation indicates diminished capacity. My breath caught, the words striking like a physical blow. Behind me, the hallway light flickered once more, then steadied. Somewhere in the distance, a car horn blared, sharp and abrupt. I stood frozen, the weight of the revelation pressing down, the crew's invitation suddenly feeling like a cruel joke, set against a backdrop I could not yet comprehend. Recap: Charles Hayes, a 54-year-old architect, excitedly books a $30,000 cruise for himself and his son Brandon. Brandon's dismissive reply about Charles's age and money handling hurts him deeply. During Brandon's visit with his golden retriever Buddy, Charles notices a suspicious internal transfer of $15,000 on his bank statement and spots a legal paper titled Legal Docs, Dr. Evans, in Brandon's belongings. A detective calls about a possible fraud linked to the large transfer, and upon returning to the guest room, Charles finds the room ransacked, the legal document exposed, and Brandon's tablet damaged. The paper reveals an evaluation indicating diminished capacity, leaving Charles shocked and uncertain about the cruise and his son's intentions. The morning light filtered through the blinds of Charles's study. As he settled at his desk, the soft hum of the air conditioner mixing with the faint rustle of papers. He had just finished reviewing a set of blueprints for a new community center when his phone buzzed with an unknown number. He answered, his voice steady and measured. "Hello. This is Charles Hayes," he said. A polite voice on the other end identified itself as a representative from the downtown branch of First National Bank. "Good morning, Mr. Hayes. I'm calling about a recent transfer from your checking account. We noticed a transfer of $30,000 to an external account yesterday. May I confirm that you authorized this transaction?" Charles felt a flicker of surprise, but he kept his tone even. "I did not authorize any transfer of that size. Could you provide the name of the recipient?" The representative hesitated for a moment before responding. "I'm sorry, but for security reasons I cannot disclose that information over the phone. I can confirm the transaction was processed successfully and the funds have left your account." He thanked the representative and ended the call, his mind already turning over the implications. He leaned back in his chair, the creak of the leather audible in the quiet room. The sum was far larger than any routine expense he could recall. He thought about the upcoming cruise Brandon had mentioned, the extravagant gift his son had claimed to have paid for. A quiet tension settled in his chest, not expressed as fear, but as a sharpened focus. He decided to call Brandon directly, hoping for a simple explanation. He dialed his son's number and waited for the familiar click of the line connecting. "Dad?" Brandon's voice came through, bright and slightly hurried, the way it often did when he was juggling multiple calls. "Good morning, Brandon. I received a call from my bank regarding a $30,000 transfer from my account yesterday. Did you know anything about that?" There was a brief pause, then Brandon's tone shifted to something more clipped, his words flowing with the practiced ease of someone used to navigating financial discussions. "Actually, Dad, I did arrange that transfer. I needed to move some funds to cover a short-term investment opportunity. I thought it would be better to keep it separate from your main account so it wouldn't interfere with the cruise budget." Charles listened, noting the confidence in his son's speech, the way he used phrases like "actually" and "thought it would be better." He chose his next words carefully, aiming for the calm, measured tone that usually steadied him. "I appreciate you handling the finances, but I would have liked to be consulted before such a large sum moved. Transparency is important to me, especially when it involves family funds." Brandon's response was quick, a hint of defensiveness creeping in. "I understand your concern, Dad. I thought I was being efficient. The investment is solid, and I'll have the details ready for you by the time we set sail. You'll see it was a smart move." The conversation ended with Brandon promising to forward the details later. Charles ended the call and stared at the screen of his laptop. the screen glowing softly. He felt a pull to dig deeper, not out of accusation but from a need to understand the full picture. He opened his browser and typed the name that had appeared on the bank's notification. Dr. Evans. The search returned a modest website for a private practice in a nearby suburb, specializing in neuropsychological evaluations for estate planning and capacity assessments. The page listed credentials, a brief bio, and a contact form. Charles read through the information, noting the emphasis on forensic assessments and the mention of occasional collaboration with attorneys. A thought slipped into his mind, quiet but insistent. Why would his son need a psychiatric evaluation? He shook his head slightly, refusing to let suspicion harden into accusation. Instead, he decided to gather more information before drawing conclusions. He picked up the phone again and dialed the number of Eleanor Vance, the family law attorney who had helped him draft his will years ago. Her voice was confident and direct when she answered. "Eleanor Vance speaking," she said. "Eleanor, this is Charles Hayes. I hope I'm not calling at an inconvenient time. I have a question about a recent financial transaction and a possible evaluation request." There was a brief pause, then her tone shifted to one of focused attention. "Go ahead, Mr. Hayes. I'm listening." Charles explained the bank call, the transfer amount, and Brandon's mention of Dr. Evans. He kept his description factual, avoiding any emotive labels. "I'm trying to understand whether this evaluation is related to the cruise plans or something else entirely." Eleanor's response was measured, her words chosen with precision. "It is not uncommon for families to seek capacity assessments when large financial decisions are on the horizon. However, if the request originated without your knowledge, it warrants clarification. I can reach out to Dr. Evans on your behalf to request a copy of any report, provided the proper releases are in place." He thanked her, feeling a modest sense of relief that a professional could help clarify the situation. He ended the call and leaned back, the chair sighing under his weight. The morning light had shifted, casting longer shadows across the desk. He noticed a small envelope tucked beneath a stack of legal pads, Brandon's handwriting on the front, sealed but not stamped. He hesitated only a moment before opening it. Inside lay a single sheet of paper. He typed note. "Legal docs, Dr. Evans. Please review before Friday. B." The handwriting was neat, the tone businesslike. A cold sensation crept up his spine, not expressed as fear but as a sharpened awareness that something was being concealed. He placed the note back exactly as he found it, then rose to check on Buddy, the golden retriever Brandon had left in his care. The dog greeted him with a wagging tail, eyes bright and eager. Charles knelt to scratch behind the dog's ears, feeling the familiar warmth of the animal's fur against his palm. The simple act grounded him, reminding him of the steady companionship that asked for nothing but affection. Later that afternoon, he found himself in Brandon's home office, the door ajar, the space tidy but personal. He moved quietly, not wanting to intrude, and glanced at the desk. A laptop sat open, its screen dimmed. On the corner of the desk lay a glossy brochure for a luxury cruise line, the same one Brandon had described. Next to it, a stack of papers bore the letterhead of a law firm he did not recognize. A soft chime from the laptop caught his attention. He glanced at the screen just as a new email notification popped up. The subject line read, "Follow up on evaluation request. Dr. Evans." The preview showed a line that read, "Please find attached the preliminary assessment for Mr. Hayes." His breath caught, not with panic but with a sharpened resolve. He stepped back, closing the door softly, and made his way to the living room where Emily was arranging fresh flowers in a vase. She looked up, her smile soft, her voice gentle when she spoke. "Hello, Charles. How is Buddy settling in?" He returned her smile, choosing his words to match her calm tone. "He's doing well. He's already claimed the sunny spot by the window." Thank you for looking after the flowers. They brighten the room. She glanced toward the hallway where Brandon's office door stood closed. I heard you speaking with the bank earlier. Is everything all right? He paused, considering how much to reveal. He opted for honesty without accusation. I received notice of a large transfer from my account. Brandon said it was for an investment related to the cruise. I wanted to make sure everything was transparent. Her eyebrows lifted slightly, a sign of curiosity rather than accusation. I saw an advertisement for a premium travel insurance plan pop up on Brandon's laptop yesterday. It mentioned something about legacy planning. I wondered if it was connected. He nodded, appreciating her observation. That's exactly what I'm trying to figure out. I'll speak with Eleanor Vance later today to get clarity. She smiled again, a touch of resolve in her expression. If you need any help, just let me know. I want to make sure whatever is happening is fair for everyone. He thanked her, feeling a faint warmth spread through his chest. Not the kind that could be labeled as relief, but a quiet sense of alliance forming. Later that day, he found himself at a quiet coffee shop on the corner of Maple and Fifth. The sort of place where the barista knew his usual order. Black coffee, no sugar. He sat at a corner table, notebook open, waiting for Eleanor Vance to arrive. The door chimed as she entered, her presence commanding yet approachable. She wore a navy blazer, her hair pulled back neatly, and she carried a leather satchel. She slid into the seat opposite him, placing her bag down with a soft thud. Thank you for meeting me, Charles. I've contacted Dr. Evans's office. They agreed to send over the preliminary report, pending your signed release. He nodded, appreciating her efficiency. I appreciate your help, Counselor Vance. I want to understand what's happening before I make any decisions. She opened her laptop, pulling up a secured email thread. Here is the consent form. Once you sign and return it, the report will be released to me directly, and I can share the relevant findings with you. He took the document, scanning the legal language with practiced ease. The clauses were standard, covering confidentiality and the purpose of the evaluation. He signed with a steady hand, feeling the weight of the pen as a small act of agency. When he handed it back, she smiled faintly. Thank you. I'll follow up with the doctor's office today and let you know as soon as I have anything. He stood, gathering his things. Thank you, Eleanor. I'll be in touch. As he stepped back onto the sidewalk, the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the pavement. He paused, watching a group of children chase a balloon down the street, their laughter light and carefree. A thought rose in his mind, unspoken but clear. He needed to protect that simplicity for his family, no matter what lay ahead. He walked toward his car, the keys cool in his palm. He glanced at the rearview mirror as he pulled out of the parking spot, catching a glimpse of his own reflection, steady eyes, a faint line of concentration between his brows. He started the engine and drove home, the city's hum blending with the quiet determination growing inside him. Upon arriving, he found Buddy waiting at the door, tail thumping against the wood. He knelt, rubbing the dog's ears, and whispered, "We'll figure this out together, boy." Inside, Emily was in the kitchen, preparing a simple salad. She looked up as he entered, her eyes meeting his. "How did the meeting go?" she asked. He washed his hands at the sink, the water cool against his skin. "Eleanor is moving forward with the request for the report. We should have answers soon." She nodded, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "I'll keep an eye on anything unusual on Brandon's laptop. If I see anything else, I'll let you know." He smiled, grateful for her vigilance. "Thank you, Emily. That means a lot." They fell into a comfortable rhythm, preparing the meal together, the clink of utensils and the soft murmur of conversation filling the kitchen. As they ate, the conversation drifted to everyday topics: the weather, a new exhibit at the downtown gallery, the upcoming community meeting. Yet beneath the surface, A current of alertness ran through both of them, a shared readiness to act when the time came. Later, after the dishes were cleared, Charles retreated to his study. He opened his laptop and drafted a brief email to Eleanor, confirming receipt of the consent form and asking for an estimated timeline. He pressed send, then leaned back, the chair creaking softly. The screen dimmed as he paused, his gaze drifting to the framed photograph on the wall, a picture of him and Brandon from a family vacation years ago, both smiling, arms slung over each other's shoulders. The image stood in stark contrast to the unease that now lingered at the edges of his thoughts. He closed his laptop, stood, and walked to the window. The streetlights began to flicker on as dusk settled. He watched a couple walk their dog past the curb, the animal sniffing eagerly at the grass. A quiet resolve settled in his chest, not voiced as determination, but felt as a steady pulse. He knew the coming days would demand clarity, courage, and perhaps a few uncomfortable conversations. Yet he also felt, deep down, that he was not alone in facing whatever lay ahead. He turned away from the window, flicked off the lamp, and headed to bed. The house fell silent, except for the occasional sigh of the old floorboards settling. In the darkness, his mind replayed the day's events: the bank call, the note, the coffee shop meeting, Emily's watchful eye. Each piece clicked into place like a careful draft, each line drawn with purpose. He drifted off with the quiet assurance that he would see the truth, whatever shape it took, and that he would meet it with the steady hand of an architect who knows that every structure, no matter how complex, begins with a solid foundation. The phone on the desk buzzed with a familiar tone, and I glanced at the screen to see Brandon's name flashing. I pressed the speaker and leaned back in the leather chair that creaked under my weight. "Dad, I hope you're not feeling under the weather," Brandon said, his voice smooth but edged with something I could not place. "I heard there's a flu going around the port, and I thought it might be wise to push the cruise back a week or two." I felt a tightness in my jaw. "I've already paid for the trip, Brandon. The tickets are non-refundable and the ship leaves tomorrow morning. I am not inclined to change my plans because of a rumor." He laughed softly, a sound that lacked warmth. "You always were the cautious one, Dad. I just want you to be safe. There's also a rumor about a legal snag with the shipping company. Better safe than sorry, right?" I kept my tone even, though my thoughts raced like a drafting line under tension. "I have spoken with my agent at the line. They assured me everything is in order. I will be boarding as planned." End of quote. There was a pause, then he said, "Very well, Father. If you insist, I will see you at the terminal. Give Buddy a pat for me." The line clicked off. I set the receiver down and stared at the polished wood of my desk. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, each tick a reminder that time was slipping away. I stood, smoothed the creases from my trousers, and walked to the hallway where a small console table held a brass key to Brandon's study. I had borrowed it weeks ago, when he asked me to water his ficus while he was away on a business trip. The key still hung on its hook, bright and cool to the touch. I slipped the key into the lock and turned it softly. The door opened onto a room that smelled of polished mahogany and faint citrus from a diffuser on the shelf. Sunlight filtered through the blinds, casting thin bars of light across the polished floor. A large desk dominated the space, cluttered with legal pads, a sleek laptop, and a framed photograph of Brandon and Emily on a beach vacation. I moved to the side of the desk where a small vent sat near the ceiling. I removed the vent cover with a screwdriver I kept in my pocket for such emergencies and slipped a tiny wireless camera into the duct. The lens was no larger than a pea, its lens pointing toward the desk. I replaced the cover, tightened the screw, and stepped back to listen for any click that might betray its presence. The room remained silent except for the distant hum of the city outside. I left the study and closed the door behind me, locking it with the same key. As I walked down the hall, I caught a glimpse of Emily standing in the kitchen, her hands wrapped around a warm mug. She stared out the window, her forehead creased in a line I had not seen there before. She turned as I approached, forcing a smile that did not reach her eyes. "Is everything all right?" she asked, her voice soft, the way she used when she tried to hide worry. I paused, choosing my words with the care I used when selecting a marble slab for a facade. "Brandon just called. He suggested we postpone the cruise because of a flu outbreak. I told him the trip is set." She nodded slowly, eyes flicking to the hallway where Brandon's office door stood closed. "He seemed concerned," she said. "I heard him mention something about a legal issue with the ship." "Did he say what it was?" I shook my head. "He spoke in vague terms. I pressed him for details, but he offered none." She took a sip of tea, the ceramic warm against her palms. "I will keep an ear out. If anything feels off, I will let you know." I nodded, feeling the weight of her gaze settle on me like a soft shadow. "Thank you, Emily. I appreciate it." We stood in silence for a moment, the only sound the faint clink of her spoon against the mug. Then she turned back to the sink, and I continued toward the front door. The afternoon light had begun to slant, painting the lawn in shades of gold and amber. A breeze rustled the leaves of the maple trees that lined the sidewalk, sending a whisper of scent, wet earth, and distant barbecue through the air. I paused at the curb and looked toward the marina, where the cruise ship loomed like a white whale against the blue horizon. My heart steadied as I thought of the contract I had signed months ago, the plans I had drawn for the renovation of the community center that would bear my name. I would not let a son's scheming undermine a lifetime of work. I turned and walked back toward the house, my steps measured on the paved path. As I passed the garage, I noticed the sedan parked there, its engine still warm. Brandon's coat was draped over the passenger seat, and a leather briefcase sat beside it. I frowned briefly, then dismissed the thought as my curiosity. He often left his things in the car when he ran errands. I entered the house and headed to the study where I kept my own workstation. I booted the computer and opened the security feed from the cameras I had installed around the perimeter of the property weeks ago, after a string of break-ins in the neighborhood had made me uneasy. The screen flickered to life, showing the front yard, the side gate, and the rear patio. I scanned each feed, noting the quiet street, the occasional jogger, and the squirrel that darted across the fence. Then I clicked to the interior camera that covered the hallway outside Brandon's study. The timestamp read 2:47 p.m. I watched as the door opened, and Brandon stepped out, his briefcase in hand. He walked down the hall, paused at the coat rack, and slipped his coat on. He turned toward the front door, paused, and glanced back toward the study, as if checking that no one observed him. He opened the front door and stepped onto the porch, the briefcase swinging lightly at his side. He paused again, looked toward the street, and then walked down the driveway toward the curb where his sedan waited. I felt a prickle at the base of my skull. Something about his manner felt rehearsed, as if he were performing a role he had practiced many times. I leaned closer to the screen, the soft glow illuminating the lines on my forehead. The car door opened. He slipped inside, and the engine purred to life. The vehicle pulled away from the curb and turned onto the main road, heading away from the marina. I stared at the empty driveway for a few heartbeats, then turned my attention back to the hallway feed. The camera showed the study door swinging shut behind him. I could see the edge of his desk, the stack of papers, and the small potted plant that sat in the corner. Nothing out of the ordinary caught my eye, except the faint glint of metal near the vent I had just tampered with. I leaned forward, squinting. The camera angle did not give a clear view, but I could see a tiny dark spot where the lens peered out. I exhaled slowly, the breath leaving my chest in a quiet rush. I had done what I could for now. The camera would record whatever transpired in that room, and I would review the footage later. I closed the laptop and stood, stretching my shoulders, feeling the familiar tension of an architect who had just finished inspecting a load-bearing beam. I walked to the kitchen where Emily was rinsing a mug. She looked up as I entered, her eyes meeting mine for a brief second before she returned to the task. "Did you find anything useful?" she asked, her voice low enough that only I could hear. I shook my head. "Not yet, but I have eyes in his office now. If he is hiding something, the camera will catch it." She nodded, her fingers still moving over the ceramic. "I will keep listening when he talks on the phone. If he mentions anything about a doctor or a lawyer, I will let you know." I gave her a small smile, the kind I reserved for moments when I felt a flicker of hope. "Thank you. That means a lot." She finished rinsing the mug and placed it in the rack. "I will go upstairs and check on Buddy. He seemed restless earlier." I watched her leave the room, the soft click of her heels on the hardwood fading as she climbed the stairs. I turned back to the counter and poured myself a glass of water, the cool liquid sliding down my throat, grounding me in the present moment. The house settled into its afternoon hush, the only sound, the distant hum of traffic, and the occasional chirp of a sparrow perched on the eave. I walked to the front door and looked out at the street. A delivery truck rumbled past, its brakes sighing as it stopped at the corner. A neighbor waved from her porch, her hand lifted in a friendly gesture that I returned with a nod. My thoughts drifted to the blueprints spread across my drafting table at work, the lines and angles that would soon become a community center where children could learn to paint and seniors could gather for tea. I had spent years drafting those plans, pouring my love for structure and balance into every line. The idea that someone I had raised might try to erase that legacy felt like a crack in the foundation of a building I had poured my heart into. I shook my head, refusing to let doubt settle like dust on a drafting surface. I would see this through, just as I had seen every project through to completion, from the first sketch to the final walkthrough. I turned away from the window and headed back toward the study. I paused at the doorway, hand resting on the cool wood of the frame, and listened. The house was quiet, save for the faint tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway. I opened the door and stepped inside, my shoes making little sound on the plush carpet. I walked to the desk and pulled out the chair, sitting with a sigh that seemed to release a fraction of the tension coiled in my spine. I opened the laptop again and opened the folder labeled Security Feed. I clicked on the file for the hallway camera, set the playback to start at 2:45 p.m., and leaned forward as the images began to roll. The screen showed the empty hallway, the soft light from the sconces casting gentle shadows. I watched as the minutes ticked by, the clock in the corner of the display moving forward. At 2:52 p.m., the door to the study opened again. This time it was not Brandon who stepped out, but a woman in a dark coat, her hair tucked under a woolen hat. She carried a small tote and moved with purpose toward the front door. She paused, glanced at the security camera mounted in the corner of the hallway, and then slipped out into the fading light. I frowned, trying to place her face. She was not Emily, nor anyone I recognized from the neighborhood watch meetings. Her posture was straight, her steps confident, as if she knew exactly where she was going. I continued to watch, the seconds stretching. At 2:58 p.m., the front door opened once more, and a figure stepped onto the porch. It was Brandon, but he was not alone. He carried a large, dark-colored suitcase that seemed to weigh him down slightly. He set it down beside his sedan, opened the trunk, and lifted the case inside with a grunt of effort. He closed the trunk, slid into the driver's seat, and started the engine. The car rolled forward, turned onto the street, and disappeared from view. My breath caught in my throat. The suitcase was too large for a weekend trip. It looked sturdy, built for carrying more than a change of clothes. My mind raced, fitting the pieces together like a complex blueprint. He had called to delay the cruise. He had left the house with a suitcase, and he had been speaking in vague terms about legal matters. I felt a surge of anger, hot and sharp, flare behind my ribs, but I forced it down, focusing instead on the need for proof. I sat back, the chair creaking under my weight, and stared at the blank screen where the video had ended. The house remained still. The only sound the faint ticking of the clock and the distant hum of the refrigerator. I knew I had to act quickly before the ship set sail tomorrow morning. I stood, walked to the door, and slipped my shoes on, feeling the familiar weight of responsibility settle on my shoulders like a steel beam ready to bear load. I paused at the threshold, hand on the doorknob, and glanced back at the empty study. The camera continued to record, its tiny eye unseen but ever watchful. I took a deep breath, exhaled slowly, and stepped out into the cooling evening air, the streetlights beginning to flicker on one by one as twilight deepened. As I walked toward my car, I caught sight of a figure standing near the mailbox at the end of the drive. It was Emily, her arms crossed, her gaze fixed on the house. She looked troubled, her brow furrowed, her lips pressed together in a thin line. I could see the concern etched into her features, the way her fingers tapped lightly against her arm in a nervous rhythm. I approached slowly, my shoes crunching on the gravel. "Is everything all right?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. She turned, her eyes meeting mine, and for a moment I saw the raw worry that lay beneath her composed exterior. "I heard him talking on the phone earlier," she said, her voice low. "He mentioned a doctor's appointment, something about an evaluation. I didn't catch the name, but it sounded urgent." I felt a chill run down my spine, not from the evening air, but from the realization that his secrecy ran deeper than I had imagined. "Did you hear which doctor?" I asked, trying to keep my tone even. She shook her head. "No, I only caught the word doctor." He sounded strained, like he was trying to convince someone of something. I nodded, my mind already racing through possible scenarios. "Thank you for telling me, Emily. I will keep my ears open as well." She gave a small, tight smile. "I will too. If you need anything, just call." I thanked her and continued to my car, the weight of the situation settling onto my chest like a heavy load bearing down on a truss. I opened the driver's side door, slipped inside, and turned the key. The engine purred to life, filling the cabin with a low, steady vibration. I pulled away from the curb, the tires humming against the asphalt, and drove toward the marina. The city lights began to sparkle as night deepened, each one a tiny beacon in the growing darkness. My thoughts were a mixture of anger, determination, and a fierce protectiveness for the life I had built. I would not let a hidden agenda tear apart what I had worked so hard to create. I arrived at the marina parking lot and parked my car near the entrance. I got out, inhaled the salty breeze that carried the faint scent of diesel and seaweed, and walked toward the terminal. The massive cruise ship loomed ahead, its white hull gleaming under the floodlights, a symbol of leisure and escape that now felt like a potential trap. I stopped at the security desk, flashed my identification, and asked to speak with the captain, or the purser. The attendant, a young woman with a polite smile, told me the captain was unavailable until boarding time but that she could pass along any concerns. I hesitated, then decided to wait. I found a bench nearby and sat, watching as passengers began to trickle in, their laughter and chatter filling the salty air. I kept my eyes on the entrance, my mind replaying the video of Brandon loading the suitcase into his car. I wondered what he hoped to gain, what secret he carried inside that battered case. A few minutes later, a man in a Navy uniform approached me. He had the bearing of someone used to command, his shoulders straight, his gaze steady. "Good evening, sir. I am Chief Security Officer Malik. How can I help you today?" I took a breath, steadied my voice, and said, "I have reason to believe that someone intending to board this vessel may be attempting to conceal something illicit. I would like to speak with whoever is in charge of passenger screening." He nodded, his expression professional but alert. "Please follow me, sir. We will discuss this in a private office." We walked through a side door into a small room lined with monitors displaying live feeds from various cameras around the terminal. He gestured for me to sit, And I did, feeling the cool leather of the chair beneath my palms. I explained briefly what I had seen on my home security feed: the lady-night departure with the large suitcase, the vague phone call about postponing the cruise, the mention of a doctor's appointment. I kept my tone factual, avoiding any language that sounded like accusation, focusing instead on the observations I could verify. Officer Malik listened, his eyes flicking to the screens as he spoke. "Thank you for bringing this to our attention, Mr. Hayes. We will review the relevant footage and conduct any necessary checks before boarding." He pressed a few keys, and a split-screen view appeared, showing the terminal's exterior cameras. I watched as the feed showed a sedan pulling up to the curb at approximately 8:15 p.m., the same time I had seen Brandon leave my driveway. The driver stepped out, opened the trunk, and lifted a large, dark suitcase, identical in size and shape to the one I had witnessed on my own feed, before placing it inside the vehicle. The car then pulled away and merged onto the highway toward the city. My heart pounded, not from fear, but from the surge of validation that came with concrete proof. I turned to Officer Malik, my voice steady but firm. "Please detain that vehicle and inspect its contents before any passengers are allowed to board." He considered my request for a moment, then nodded. "We will do exactly that. Thank you for your vigilance." I stood, thanked him, and stepped back out into the night. The terminal lights shone brightly ahead, the ship's horn sounding a low, mournful note that seemed to echo across the water. I felt a strange mixture of relief and tension, knowing that the night was far from over, but that I had taken a decisive step toward protecting what mattered most. I walked back to my car, the cool air brushing against my cheeks, and drove home with a sense of purpose that steadied my hands on the wheel. The streets were quiet, the city's nocturnal rhythm, a soft murmur beneath the tires. As I pulled into my driveway, I glanced up at the second-floor window where Emily's silhouette appeared, her hand resting on the sill, watching me arrive. I turned off the engine, sat for a moment, and let the silence settle. Then I opened the door, stepped onto the porch, and walked toward the front door. The house stood quiet and dark, the only light coming from the kitchen where a small lamp glowed softly over the counter. I entered, hung my coat on the rack, and moved toward the study. I paused at the doorway, hand on the wooden frame, and listened. The house was silent except for the faint ticking of the clock and the distant hum of the refrigerator. I opened the door and stepped inside, the familiar scent of mahogany and polish wrapping around me like an old friend. I walked to the desk, sat down, and opened the laptop once more. I opened the security folder and selected the file from the hallway camera that covered the time period when Brandon had left with the suitcase. I pressed play and leaned forward as the images began to roll. The hallway was empty, the sconces casting a warm glow. I watched as the door to the study opened and Brandon emerged, his briefcase in hand, his coat draped over his arm. He paused at the coat rack, slipped his coat on, and then turned toward the front door. He glanced once more toward the study, his expression unreadable, then opened the front door and stepped onto the porch. He paused again, looking down the driveway as if checking for any onlookers, then walked toward his sedan. He opened the rear door, lifted the large, dark suitcase from the ground, and placed it carefully inside. He closed the trunk with a soft click, slid into the driver's seat, and started the engine. The car purred to life, reversed out of the driveway, and turned onto the street, disappearing from view. I sat back, the chair creaking slightly under my weight, and let the information settle. The evidence was clear. Brandon had left the house with a sizable suitcase, had spoken vaguely about postponing the cruise, and had mentioned a doctor's appointment that sounded urgent. The pieces were beginning to form a pattern, though the full picture remained obscured by shadows. I closed the laptop, leaned back, and let out a slow breath. The night outside was deep, the stars pinpricks of light against the velvet sky. I knew I would need to stay vigilant, to keep watching, to keep listening. But for now, I had taken a concrete step forward, and that steadied my resolve more than any vague worry ever could. I rose from the chair, stretched my arms above my head, and walked toward the kitchen where a glass of water waited on the counter. I filled it, drank deeply, and felt the cool liquid travel down my throat, grounding me in the present moment. I placed the glass back in the sink, wiped my hands on a dish towel, and turned toward the stairs. I paused at the bottom, listened for any sound from above, and heard only the soft, steady rhythm of Emily's breathing as she slept. I smiled faintly, grateful for her quiet strength, and began to climb. Each step on the wooden staircase reminded me of the beams I had calculated and inspected over the years, each one bearing weight, each one essential to the integrity of the whole. I thought of the foundation I had poured for the community center, the care I had taken to ensure it would stand for generations. I would extend that same care to my own family, ensuring that no hidden crack could undermine what we had built. I reached the upper floor, paused outside Emily's bedroom door, and listened. Her breathing was even, her body relaxed in sleep. I did not disturb her. Instead, I turned and walked down the hall to the guest room where I kept my spare coats and a small trunk of drafting tools. I opened the closet, pulled out a light jacket, and slipped it on, feeling the familiar weight of the fabric against my shoulders. I then went to the bathroom, splashed cool water on my face, and looked at my reflection in the mirror. The lines etched by years of work and worry were still there, but my eyes were steady, my jaw set with a quiet determination. I turned off the light, stepped back into the hallway, and made my way back downstairs. I entered the living room, sank into the soft sofa, and pulled the blanket that lay draped over the armrest over my legs. I turned on the lamp beside the sofa, its soft glow casting a warm pool of light on the coffee table. I picked up a notebook and a pen, the tools I used when I needed to work out a design problem or jot down a thought that refused to stay in my mind. I opened to a fresh page and began to write, not a blueprint for a building, but a timeline of events as I had observed them so far. I noted the phone call from Brandon, his suggestion to postpone the cruise, his vague reference to a legal issue, the visit to the doctor's office that Emily had overheard, the lady-night departure with the large suitcase, and the confirmation from the terminal security footage. Each entry was a beam in the mental structure I was building, each one helping me see where the load might be shifting. As I wrote, the house remained still, the night deepening outside. The clock on the mantel ticked on, each second a small but steady beat. I felt the weight of responsibility settle on my shoulders, not as a burden, but as a firm load that I was accustomed to bearing. When I finished the last line, I closed the notebook, set it aside, and leaned back into the sofa. The room was quiet, the only sound the occasional sigh of the old house as it settled. I closed my eyes for a moment, allowing the darkness behind my lids to be a brief respite from the thoughts that swirled like wind around a skyscraper under construction. I opened my eyes, glanced at the clock, and saw that it was nearing 11 p.m. I knew sleep would not come easily, but I also knew that rest was essential for the clarity I would need in the days ahead. I rose, folded the blanket neatly, and placed it back on the armrest. I turned off the lamp, plunging the room into soft darkness, lit only by the faint glow of the streetlights filtering through the curtains. I walked to the front door, peered out through the peephole, and saw the street empty, the occasional car passing far in the distance. I turned the knob, stepped onto the porch, and inhaled the cool night air deeply. The scent of distant rain mingled with the faint aroma of freshly cut grass from a neighbor's yard, a reminder that life continued its steady rhythm beyond the walls of my home. I stepped back inside, closed the door, and leaned against it for a moment, feeling the solid wood support my weight. I pushed off, walked down the short hall to the staircase, and began to ascend once more, my steps measured and deliberate, each one a small but steady contribution to the ascent I would need to make in the days to come. When I reached the landing outside the bedroom, I paused, listening again to the soft, even rhythm of Emily's breathing. I turned and walked toward the guest room door, opened it quietly, and slipped inside. I closed the door behind me, drew the curtains just enough to block the streetlight, and slipped into bed. The mattress yielded beneath me, the sheets cool and smooth against my skin. I pulled the blanket up to my chin, let out a slow breath, and allowed the darkness to wrap around me like a familiar cloak. My mind drifted over the day's events. The phone call, the video, the conversation with Officer Malik, the quiet determination that had settled in my chest. I felt a quiet certainty settle alongside the fatigue. A sense that, though the road ahead might be rough, I had the tools, the experience, and the resolve to see it through. Sleep came gradually, pulling me under like a tide that knows its course, and I surrendered to its gentle pull, trusting that tomorrow would bring clearer light and the chance to act on what I had uncovered. A faint hiss rose from the kettle as Emily's grip tightened on the handle. I stood in the doorway of the guest room, still feeling the weight of sleep pull at my limbs, and watched her shoulders rise with each quiet breath. The morning light filtered through the thin curtains, laying a soft gold strip across the kitchen floor where her bare feet touched the cool tile. She poured water into the chipped mug she always used, the ceramic clinking faintly against the sink. I could see the tension in her jaw, the way her eyes flickered to the laptop screen before she looked away. "Did you sleep?" I asked, keeping my voice low so as not to startle her. She turned, a small smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. "I did. You were restless last night." Her words were soft, but I heard the note of concern beneath them. I stepped inside, closing the door behind me. The house smelled of old wood and the faint hint of lavender from the sachet she kept in the hallway. "I kept thinking about the footage from the camera," I said, choosing my words carefully. "I need to see what Brandon actually said when he thought no one was listening." Emily's expression shifted, her brows drawing together just a fraction. "You found something?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, moving toward the small table where I had left my notebook. "Last night, after you fell asleep, I replayed the recordings from the device I placed in his desk. There was a conversation I did not expect." I paused, feeling the weight of each syllable settle in my chest. "He spoke with someone about obtaining an evaluation of my mental state. He mentioned moving the cruise funds to an account under his name." She inhaled sharply, the sound catching in her throat. That explains the transfer you saw on the statement." Her hands trembled as she lifted the mug, steam curling upward in a thin spiral. I watched her set the mug down, the ceramic making a soft thud. "Did you notice anything else in his office yesterday?" I asked, trying to keep my tone steady. She glanced toward the hallway, where the door to Brandon's study stood ajar. "I went in while he was out," she confessed, her eyes dropping to the floor. I saw a folder labeled Dr. Evans on his desk. Inside were papers that looked like medical forms, but the handwriting seemed off. There was also a list of your assets, written in neat columns. A cold sensation traveled down my spine. Not from fear, but from the sharp clarity of realization. "Did you take anything?" I inquired, my voice low. She shook her head slowly. "I didn't want to risk being seen. I only looked long enough to understand what I was seeing." She lifted her chin, meeting my gaze with a resolve that surprised me. "But I know enough to say he is planning something serious." I felt a surge of gratitude mixed with urgency. "We need to show this to someone who can help us move forward legally." Eleanor Vance agreed to assist if we had concrete evidence. I kept my hands relaxed at my sides, feeling the texture of the wool sweater against my skin. "I will call her now. You should stay here. Keep an eye on anything unusual." She nodded, her fingers tightening around the edge of the table. "I will. And I will keep the laptop close. If he returns, I will try to hear more." I turned toward the study, the floorboards creaking under my weight. The scent of polished mahogany greeted me as I pushed the door open. The room bathed in the pale light of morning. The camera I had hidden inside a decorative clock on the shelf blinked faintly, its red recording light off now that I had stopped it. I sat down in the leather chair, the cool surface seeping through my trousers, and opened the laptop that lay closed on the desk. The screen flickered to life, prompting me for a password. I entered the sequence I had seen Brandon use once, when he thought I was not watching. The desktop appeared, revealing a folder named Operation Legacy. My heart hammered against my ribs, not with panic but with a fierce determination. I double-clicked, and a video file opened, its timestamp showing yesterday afternoon. I leaned forward, the chair creaking softly, and pressed play. The grainy image showed Brandon seated across from a man in a crisp suit, the lawyer's nameplate barely visible on the desk between them. Brandon's voice was low, confident, his gestures precise as he spoke. "The evaluation will come back as incapacitated if we frame it right," he said, his eyes darting to the suit jacket of his companion. "Once we have the papers, the cruise money can be redirected without question. He will never suspect a thing." My fingers tightened on the keyboard, the keys clicking under pressure. The man in the suit nodded, his expression calm. "We will need a signed affidavit from Dr. Evans. He is willing to cooperate for a fee." Brandon leaned back, a smirk touching his lips. "Fee his lips. I have already arranged the payment. He will deliver the report by next week." He glanced toward the door, as if expecting someone. "And the transfer? It's already cleared. The funds sit in an offshore account linked to a shell I set up months ago." The video ended, the screen returning to the desktop. I sat still, the hum of the laptop fan the only sound in the room. The words replayed in my mind, each one a solid brick in the wall of evidence I was building. A soft knock at the door pulled me from my thoughts. Emily stood there, her eyes wide, her breath shallow. "I heard voices," she whispered. "I think someone just left." I rose, my joints stiff from sitting. "Did you see who?" I asked, keeping my tone even. She shook her head. "Just a car pulling away down the drive. Dark sedan. No plates visible." She hesitated, then added, "I also noticed an envelope tucked under the keyboard. It was sealed, but I could see the corner of a logo. Something with a caduceus." I felt a prickle at the base of my skull, not from alarm but from the promise of another piece. "Show me," I said, gesturing toward the desk. She pulled out the chair, her movements deliberate, and slid the envelope toward me. The paper bore the emblem of a psychiatric clinic, the address printed in neat block letters. I turned it over, feeling the slight ridge of a seal on the flap. Inside lay a single sheet, the handwriting unmistakably Brandon's, sharp, angled, each letter a deliberate stroke. "Dear Dr. Evans," it began. "Thank you for agreeing to see Mr. Hayes on short notice. Please find attached the compensation for your discretion. The evaluation should reflect the concerns we discussed." Below that, a series of numbers and a bank routing number were listed in neat columns. I folded the paper slowly, feeling the crease form under my fingertips. The realization settled like a stone in my gut. Brandon had not only planned to seize the cruise money, but was already laying the groundwork to have me declared incapable of managing my own affairs. Emily's hand rested on my shoulder, her grip firm. "We need to take this to Eleanor today," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor I could feel in her fingers. "If we wait, he might move faster." I nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility settle not as a burden but as a purpose. "I will call her now. You keep the laptop and the envelope safe. If he returns, do not confront him. Just note the time and any details." She gave a small, resolute nod. "I will." I walked to the hallway, the old house sighing around me as the wind nudged the eaves. I pulled out my phone, dialing Eleanor's number with a thumb that moved without hesitation. The line rang twice before her voice came through, calm and professional. "Good morning, Charles. What brings you to call so early?" she asked. I took a breath, feeling the solid wood of the wall behind me anchor me. I've obtained evidence that my son Brandon is attempting to have me declared incapacitated in order to gain control of my assets, including the funds used for the cruise. I have video of him discussing the plan with a lawyer and a document showing payment to Dr. Evans for a falsified evaluation. There was a brief pause, then her tone sharpened. Send me everything you have. I will file an emergency motion to halt any guardianship proceedings and request a forensic audit of his accounts. We will also need to secure the original cruise payment receipt. I felt a flicker of relief, but also a renewed urgency. I will email you the video file and the scanned document within the hour. Emily is keeping the laptop and the physical envelope safe. Excellent, she replied. Do not confront him directly until we have the legal safeguards in place. He may try to intimidate or manipulate you further. I ended the call, the line going dead with a soft click. I turned to find Emily watching me from the doorway, her expression a mixture of fear and fierce protectiveness. We have a plan, I said, my voice low but steady. We will not let him take what is ours. She stepped forward, placing her hand over mine where it rested on the desk. We will fight together, she whispered, her breath warm against my ear. Outside, a lone bird called from the treetops, its note clear and piercing. The house stood quiet, the morning light growing stronger as it spilled across the floorboards, illuminating the dust motes that danced in the air. I felt the weight of the moment settle, not as a threat but as a call to action. One I was ready to meet with every ounce of the resolve that had carried me through years of drafting blueprints and weathering storms. I could not believe what I was hearing. The voice came from the study, low and urgent, drifting through the half-closed door. Charles stood rigid by the desk, his hands gripping the edge of the wood. Brandon lounged in the chair opposite, a smirk playing on his lips as he tapped a finger against a glass of water. I hovered in the hallway, my heart pounding against my ribs, unsure whether to step forward or retreat. Charles spoke first, his voice steady despite the tension tightening his shoulders. I saw the video, Brandon. I saw the email. I know what you have been planning. Brandon's smile faded, his eyes narrowing. You saw nothing that proves anything. You are overreacting, Father. I swallowed, feeling the dryness in my throat. What video? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, hoping my presence would not be noticed. Charles did not look at me. He kept his gaze fixed on his son. The one from the hidden camera in your office. You discussed transferring the cruise money to a hidden account and arranging a false evaluation with Dr. Evans. Brandon laughed, a short, harsh sound that echoed off the walls. You think a grainy clip changes anything? I have papers already filed. The court will see I am acting in the family's best interest. I stepped into the room, my shoes soft on the polished floor. The air felt thick, each breath a struggle. What do you mean by best interest? I asked, trying to keep my tone calm. Brandon leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. Your mind is slipping, Dad. You forget things. You make poor decisions. I am protecting the estate from your own mistakes. Charles's jaw tightened. I have never been declared incapable. I have run this firm for 30 years without a single complaint. You will be, Brandon said, his voice dropping to a cold whisper. Dr. Evans will declare you unfit. I will become your guardian. Then the assets are safe. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. Not from fear, but from the starkness of his words. You would betray your own father for money? I blurted out, the question escaping before I could stop it. Brandon's eyes flashed. Betrayal is a strong word. I am doing what any responsible son would do. You're of the family would. You are too old to understand the markets, the tax implications, the need for safeguards. Charles stood up straight, his back rigid. I will not let you strip me of my rights. I will contest this. I will see you in court. Brandon stood as well, his chair scraping loudly. You will lose, Father. The paperwork is already in motion. You will be deemed incapable, and I will take control. If you make a scene, I will make sure the world sees you as a senile old man clinging to illusions. I could not stay silent any longer. Emily, come here, I whispered, though my voice sounded louder than I intended. I stepped toward the door, intending to fetch her. But Brandon's hand shot out, gripping my forearm with surprising strength. Stay out of this, he hissed, his grip tightening. This is between me and my father. I winced, the pressure biting into my skin. You are hurting me, I said, trying to keep my voice steady despite the pain. He released me instantly, his expression shifting to feigned concern. Sorry. I did not mean to hurt you. Just stay out of matters you do not understand. I rubbed my arm, the sting fading into a dull ache. Charles watched the exchange, his face unreadable. You see? He said, his tone low. He will use any means to get what he wants. I glanced at Charles, then at Brandon, feeling the room spin slightly. I will not let you do this, I said, my voice gaining strength. I will tell Eleanor what I have heard. Brandon laughed again, a harsh sound that made the hairs on my arms stand up. Tell her what? That you overheard a conversation? She will need proof, and you have none. I felt a spark of defiance ignite. I have your words. I have the video. I have the email. I will bring them to her. He stepped closer, his presence overwhelming. You think a few scraps of paper and a shaky video will stop a legal process? You are naive. Charles moved between us, placing himself like a shield. Enough, he said firmly. Emily, go to Eleanor's office now. Bring the laptop and the envelope. I will handle this. I hesitated, looking from my husband's determined face to my father-in-law's angry glare. Are you sure? I asked, my voice trembling. He nodded, his eyes never leaving Brandon's. Go. Do not wait for me. I turned and hurried down the hall, my shoes clicking against the wood. My mind raced, replaying Brandon's confession, his threats, his casual cruelty. I reached the front door, fumbled with the lock, and stepped into the cool afternoon air. The sun hung low, casting long shadows across the lawn. I drove to Eleanor's office, my hands gripping the wheel tightly. The journey seemed both too short and too long. When I arrived, I found her waiting, her expression professional, yet concerned. Emily, thank you for coming, she said, standing to greet me. Charles called me just moments ago. He said you have evidence. I nodded, placing the laptop on her desk and sliding the envelope across the polished surface. He admitted everything. He said he already filed paperwork for guardianship. He threatened to ruin Charles's reputation if we fought back. Eleanor's eyes narrowed as she opened the laptop. She played the video, the grainy footage showing Brandon speaking calmly about transferring funds and arranging a false evaluation. She then scanned the email, noting the payment details to Dr. Evans. This is damning, she said quietly. We need to file an emergency motion immediately. We also need to secure the original cruise payment receipt and any other financial records. I felt a surge of relief mixed with lingering dread. What about Brandon? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She leaned forward, her elbows resting on the desk. He will be served with papers shortly. The court will look at the evidence and decide. For now, we must protect Charles's assets and ensure he is not coerced. I nodded, feeling a resolute steadiness grow within me. I will do whatever is needed. She smiled faintly. Good. Let's get to work. We spent the next hour gathering documents, drafting the motion, and confirming the timeline for the emergency hearing. As we worked, my thoughts drifted to the house, to the confrontation I had just witnessed, and to the fragile hope that we could stop Brandon's plan. When we finally finished, Eleanor stood and stretched. We will file this first thing tomorrow morning. In the meantime, keep a low profile. Do not confront Brandon again. I thanked her, gathered my things, and headed back to the car. The drive home felt longer, the setting sun painting the sky in shades of amber and violet. I pulled into the driveway, switched off the engine, and sat for a moment, gripping the steering wheel. The front door opened before I could reach for the handle. Charles stood there, his face lined with worry, but also a flicker of hope. "Did you get everything?" he asked, his voice soft. I nodded, holding up the folder with the printed evidence. "Eleanor will file tomorrow. We have a chance." He exhaled slowly, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. "Thank you, Emily. I could not have done this without you." I smiled, feeling a warmth spread through my chest despite the chill in the air. We are in this together. As we stepped inside, the house seemed to hold its breath. Buddy, the golden retriever, trotted over, his tail wagging eagerly. He nudged my hand with his nose, seeking affection. I knelt, rubbing behind his ears, feeling the familiar comfort of his presence. Charles paused in the hallway, glancing toward the study where the confrontation had taken place. "We should keep an eye on him," he murmured. "He may try something else." I nodded, my resolve hardening. "We will stay vigilant." We moved to the living room, sinking onto the soft sofa. Buddy curled up at our feet, his warm body a quiet reassurance. The evening settled around us. The distant hum of traffic, a gentle backdrop. Just as I began to relax, my phone buzzed on the coffee table. I glanced at the screen, seeing an unknown number. A flicker of unease ran through me. I answered cautiously. "Hello?" I said, my voice steady. A low, unfamiliar voice replied, "You have something that belongs to us. Meet me at the old mill tonight. Come alone." My heart hammered against my ribs. I glanced at Charles, who was watching me with concern. I swallowed, feeling the weight of the unknown settle over me like a thick fog. I ended the call, the line clicking softly. I turned to Charles, my eyes wide. "Someone wants to meet me at the old mill. They say they have something that belongs to us." His brows furrowed, his jaw tightening. "Do not go alone. This could be a trap." I nodded, feeling the resolve that had steadied me moments ago waver slightly. "I will not go without you." He reached out, squeezing my hand gently. "We will face whatever comes together." The night deepened outside, the stars beginning to prick the dark sky. I felt a mix of fear and determination, knowing that the battle was far from over, but also knowing that we were no longer alone in it. The rain tapped steadily against the office window as I leaned back in my chair, waiting for the lawyer's arrival. The soft drumming against the glass matched the slow beat of my thoughts, each drop a reminder that the world outside kept moving while my world felt suspended. I glanced at the framed photograph on the desk, a younger Brandon, grinning beside a model sailboat, his eyes bright with the kind of trust that now felt like a memory. I set the photograph down gently, the wood of the frame warm under my fingertips, and straightened the stack of legal pads beside me. The air smelled of old paper and the faint hint of sandalwood from the candle I had lit earlier, its flame flickering low but steady. A soft knock came at the door, and I straightened my spine, adjusting the cuffs of my shirt. "Come in," I called, my voice steady, the cadence measured as I had learned to speak in boardrooms and courtrooms alike. The door opened and Eleanor Vance stepped inside, her presence filling the room with a quiet authority. She wore a navy blazer, her hair pulled back into a tight braid, and she carried a leather satchel that seemed to hold the weight of many cases. She closed the door softly and moved to sit opposite me, placing the satchel on the floor with deliberate care. "Thank you for seeing me on such short notice, Counselor," I said, my tone formal but warm. "I appreciate your willingness to listen." She nodded, her eyes sharp behind thin-rimmed glasses. Mr. Hayes, tell me exactly what has brought you here today. I need the facts as you have observed them, not what you fear might be true. I took a breath, feeling the familiar rise and fall of my ribs, and began. My son Brandon has been handling my finances for the past year. Recently, I discovered a large transfer from my account to an account in his name, labeled only as a payment for a cruise. I did not authorize that sum, and when I questioned him, he offered a vague excuse about a legal matter. Since then, I have noticed odd behavior, calls at odd hours, secret meetings with a doctor I do not recognize, and a sudden interest in having me evaluated for competence. I paused, letting the words settle in the space between us. I could feel the tension in my shoulders, a tightness that eased only when I shifted my weight slightly forward. Eleanor leaned forward, her hands resting on the notepad in front of her. You have taken the right first step by documenting the transaction. Do you have any documentation of the transfer? Any emails or notes that show Brandon's involvement? I nodded, reaching into the drawer and pulling out a printed bank statement. I slid it across the desk. Here. The date is the 10th of March, 2024. The amount is $30,000. The description reads, Cruise payment, Brandon Hayes. I have also saved the email thread where he mentioned the trip, though he never mentioned the cost. She scanned the paper, her brow furrowing slightly. This is a clear discrepancy. If the transfer was unauthorized, it could constitute financial exploitation. However, to pursue a claim, we will need to show that you lacked the capacity to consent at the time, or that undue influence was used. Have you noticed any changes in your own mental state? I shook my head, feeling the faint prickle of sweat at my hairline. I feel as sharp as ever. I still design buildings, I still meet clients, I still enjoy my morning walks along the river. What troubles me is the pattern, his sudden urgency, the way he avoids eye contact when I ask about the money, the way he speaks of a doctor who will evaluate me. Eleanor tapped her pen against the pad, a soft click sound that echoed in the quiet room. We will need to obtain any records from that doctor, and we will need to look for any communication that shows Brandon directing the evaluation. In the meantime, we should secure your assets. I can file a temporary restraining order to freeze the accounts in question while we gather evidence. I felt a surge of relief, like a tide pulling back to reveal solid ground beneath. That would be a relief. I do not want to lose what I have built over decades. She nodded, her expression calm but determined. We will act swiftly. However, I must warn you. These cases can become protracted. The opposing party may try to paint you as incapable, using any shred of doubt to their advantage. We will need solid, corroborative evidence to counter that narrative. I nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility settle like a stone in my chest, not heavy but solid. I will do whatever is necessary. Tell me what you need from me. She smiled faintly, a gesture more of resolve than warmth. First, I will need you to sit for a formal capacity evaluation with an independent physician, someone we both trust. Second, I will ask you to gather any correspondence you have with Brandon about the cruise, any notes you made after your conversations, and any receipts or photographs that show you were not aboard the ship at the time the payment was processed. Third, we will look into the doctor's background, any past complaints, any disciplinary actions. Finally, we will monitor any attempts to transfer additional funds. I stood, feeling the chair scrape softly against the floorboards, and walked to the window to watch the rain intensify. The streets below glistened, reflecting the amber glow of streetlights. I turned back to her, my voice steady. Consider it done. I will gather what I can and meet you again tomorrow morning. She rose, extending her hand. I will be ready. Thank you for trusting me with this, Mr. Hayes. Our hands met briefly, firm and professional, before she turned and left, the door clicking shut behind her. I stood alone in the room, the rain now a steady sheet against the glass, and felt a quiet resolve settle over me like a well-laid foundation. Later that afternoon, I found myself in the kitchen, the scent of brewing coffee mixing with the faint citrus of the cleaner I had used on the counter. Emily sat at the table, her hands wrapped around a warm mug, her eyes flicking to the hallway, where Brandon's office door stood closed. She looked up as I entered, her expression a mixture of weariness and resolve. "Charles," she said, her voice soft but edged with something I could not quite name. Perhaps determination, perhaps fear. "I need to tell you something." I pulled out the chair opposite hers and sat, the wood creaking under my weight. "What is it?" She took a sip, the liquid disappearing slowly, and set the mug down with a gentle clink. "I went to Brandon's office today while he was out. I waited until his car left the driveway. Then I used the spare key he keeps under the flower pot. Yes, I know where it is. I wanted to see if there were any documents about the doctor, any emails that showed he was pushing for that evaluation. I felt a flicker of surprise, but I kept my face still, my eyes fixed on hers. "What did you find?" She hesitated for a heartbeat, then continued. "His desk drawer was locked, but I found a spare key in the false bottom of his pencil case. Inside I saw a printed email from Dr. Evans, dated 2 weeks ago, where Brandon asked him to prepare a favorable assessment of Mr. Hayes' mental state, emphasizing any signs of forgetfulness. There was also a note about a payment, a sum of money transferred to an offshore account labeled consultancy fee. I took a photo of the email with my phone. I felt a coldness spread through my chest, not the icy sting of fear, but the sharp clarity of a blade cutting through fog. I reached across the table and placed my hand over hers, feeling the warmth of her skin against my palm. "You did well. That is exactly what we need." She nodded, her eyes glistening but not spilling over. I also copied a few files from his laptop onto a flash drive. I hid the drive inside the lining of my coat. I thought if we could show the court that he was actively seeking a false diagnosis, it would help our case. I squeezed her hand gently, feeling the steady beat of her pulse. "We will use that. Thank you for being brave enough to do this." She offered a small smile, the kind that comes after a storm has passed, but the clouds still linger. "I just want this to end, Charles. I want to feel safe again." I stood, feeling the chair scrape softly once more, and walked to the window to look out at the rain-slicked street. The world seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the next move. I turned back to her, my voice calm but firm. "We will see this through. I will not let him take what is mine, nor will I let him hurt you." She nodded, her resolve hardening like clay left to dry in the sun. "Then let's get ready for tomorrow." The rest of the afternoon passed in quiet preparation. I gathered the bank statements, printed the email Emily had photographed, and wrote a brief timeline of events on a fresh pad of paper. I noted each interaction with Brandon, each odd phone call, each mention of Dr. Evans. I felt the weight of each entry, not as a burden but as a building block for the foundation we were trying to lay. When evening fell, I drove to the law firm's office to meet Eleanor again. She greeted me at the door, her expression focused. "I have contacted an independent physician, Dr. Langley, who agrees to see you tomorrow morning. He has no ties to Dr. Evans or to Brandon. We will also file the motion to freeze the accounts tonight." I followed her into a quiet conference room where a young associate was already setting up a laptop. Eleanor opened a file and began to outline the next steps. "First, we will submit the affidavit you will sign tomorrow, stating that you have not been diagnosed with any cognitive impairment and that you believe the transfer was unauthorized. Second, we will attach the bank statement and the email excerpt as exhibits. Third, we will request a temporary restraining order based on the evidence of undue influence." I listened, feeling the rhythm of her words settle into my thoughts like a steady drumbeat. "What about the doctor's past? You mentioned checking his background." She nodded, pulling up a web page on the screen. Dr. Evans has had 2 complaints filed with the state board in the past 5 years, both concerning allegations of bias in competency evaluations. Neither resulted in formal discipline, but the records show a pattern of complaints from families who felt the assessments were skewed toward finding incapacity. We can use that to question his credibility. I felt a spark of hope, a faint light cutting through the gloom. Good. We need to show the court that his opinion is not beyond reproach. She smiled thinly. Exactly. Now, let's get the affidavit ready for your signature. I picked up the pen she offered, feeling its weight in my fingers, and began to read the draft aloud, each word deliberate, each pause intentional. When I reached the end, I signed my name with a steady hand, the ink flowing smoothly across the page. After we finished, Eleanor closed her laptop and stood. We have done what we can for tonight. Rest, and we will reconvene first thing tomorrow. I thanked her, gathered my papers, and stepped back into the rainy, slicked evening. The city lights reflected off the wet pavement, creating ribbons of gold and amber that seemed to guide my steps forward. I walked to my car, the engine humming softly as I turned the key, and drove home with a sense of purpose settling over me like a well-fitted coat. When I arrived, the house was quiet. The lights were dim, and I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator. I placed my briefcase by the door and went upstairs to check on Emily. She was sitting on the edge of the bed, her laptop open on her lap, the screen casting a pale glow on her face. She looked up as I entered, her eyes tired but alert. "Did you get everything you needed?" I asked, my voice low so as not to disturb the house. She nodded, closing the laptop gently. I copied the files onto the drive and hid it in the lining of my coat, just like we talked about. I also took a few pictures of the desk drawer and the false bottom of the pencil case. I think we have enough to show a pattern. I felt a warm rush of gratitude, not the sort that makes one giddy, but the deep, steady kind that comes from knowing you have allies. Thank you, Emily. You have done more than I could have hoped for. She smiled, a small, genuine curve of her lips. I just want to see this end. I want to feel safe again. I sat beside her, the mattress sighing under our combined weight. We will get there, one step at a time. We sat in silence for a moment, the only sound, the distant rumble of thunder rolling across the sky. Then, as if on cue, the house lights flickered once, twice, and then went out completely. A low, humming alarm began to emanate from the basement, a sharp, insistent tone that seemed to vibrate through the floorboards. Emily's eyes widened, and she stood quickly, her hand flying to her mouth. "What is that?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the rising wail. I rose as well, my heart pounding in my chest like a drum in a march. "It sounds like the security system," I said, moving toward the door. It must have been triggered. We hurried downstairs together, the hallway lights flickering erratically as we passed. The alarm grew louder, a repetitive beeping that filled the space with urgency. I reached the basement door and pulled it open, revealing a rows of blinking red lights on the control panel mounted near the washing machine. A message scrolled across the small screen in bright red letters. "Unauthorized. Access detected." I stared at the display, the words burning into my mind. Emily stood beside me, her breath shallow, her hand gripping the rail tightly. The alarm continued its relentless chant, each beckoning sound a reminder that something, or someone, had tried to breach the very system we hoped would protect us. In that moment, the house felt less like a sanctuary, and more like a vessel caught in a sudden storm, its alarms blaring, its occupants scrambling to find shelter before the next wave hit. The rain outside continued its steady fall, indifferent to the drama unfolding within the walls of our home. Slamming the basement door, I pivoted toward the control panel, my breath hitching as the red text glared back at us. Unauthorized. Access detected. I reached for the keypad, but my fingers trembled so violently that I had to force them into fists before trying to type the sequence. Emily, stay back, I said, my voice sounding older, thinner than I intended. This isn't just a simple tripwire. Someone is inside the network. Charles. If Brandon is the one who triggered this, he knows we are here. He knows we have the files. She stepped closer, her silhouette stark against the flashing red light. We need to leave. Now. Before I could answer, the front door upstairs slammed shut with a force that rattled the floorboards under our feet. The sound echoed through the staircase like a gunshot. I looked at Emily, then toward the ceiling. Heavy, deliberate footsteps thudded against the hardwood floor in the foyer. That is not a breeze, I whispered, turning off the alarm with a final, desperate keystroke. The silence that followed was heavier than the noise. Stay behind me. I crept toward the staircase, my hand closing around the heavy brass handle of an antique fire poker resting by the furnace. My heart hammered against my ribs, each thud a reminder of the years I had wasted trusting the man who was now pacing my hallway. I reached the landing and peered around the corner. Brandon stood in the foyer. He was dressed in a charcoal coat that looked far too expensive for a midnight break-in, his hair slicked back. He held a tablet in one hand, the screen glowing, and he was staring at the security feed. I know you are here, Dad, Brandon called out, his voice smooth, devoid of any genuine warmth. He wasn't even looking up at the stairs. You really should have left the doors unlocked. It would have saved us both the mess of fixing the locks. I stepped into the light, gripping the poker tight enough to turn my knuckles white. Get out of my house, Brandon. I have already called the police. He looked up then, a slow, practiced smile spreading across his face. You called the police? That is cute. But you see, I have been talking to the local precinct. A concerned son expressing worry about his father's erratic behavior. They tend to arrive quite slowly. You are trespassing, Emily said, her voice cutting through the space from behind me. She didn't sound afraid anymore. She sounded disgusted. Brandon's eyes flickered to her, and his expression hardened for a split second before the mask slid back into place. Emily, darling, you really should have stayed in the car. You are becoming a liability to this family just like he is. We are not family, I said, descending one step, my boots silent on the carpet. Family does not forge medical reports. Family does not steal from the person who raised them. Brandon let out a sharp, dismissive laugh. Raised me? You funded me, Dad. There is a difference. You spent your life building structures of brick and glass, but you never knew how to build a legacy that could actually compete in the real world. I am just finishing what you started by ensuring the assets don't vanish into your stubborn, senile hands. Senile? I took another step down. Is that what Dr. Evans told you to put in the report? Or did you write that part yourself while you were busy moving my money into your personal accounts? His jaw tightened. For the first time, the smug facade fractured. You don't know what you are talking about. I have the recordings, Brandon, I said, my voice steady. I have the files you thought were erased. I have everything. He lunged toward the stairs, but I stood my ground, raising the fire poker. He stopped short, his face twisting into a mask of pure, unadulterated greed. Hand them over now. And maybe I won't have you committed to a facility where you can't even remember your own name by next month. Try it, I challenged. My eyes locked on his. Buddy, the golden retriever, suddenly bounded from the shadows of the living room, his low, rumbling growl filling the space. He didn't jump or bark. He simply placed himself between Brandon and me, his hackles raised, his teeth bared in a silent, predatory display I had never seen from him. Brandon stumbled back, his eyes widening. Get that animal away from me. Dad. Call it off. He doesn't like people who threaten his pack, I said, feeling a strange surge of calm. Even a dog knows a wolf when he sees one. Brandon snarled, his gaze darting toward the front door as sirens began to wail in the distance, not distant enough for his liking, apparently. He checked his tablet, tapped the screen, and cursed under his breath. "This isn't over. I have the legal use. You are just an old man with a dog and a disgruntled wife. Nobody will believe you over me. They will when they see the bank statements," Emily added, stepping out from behind me. Her phone held up, recording him. "I have everything you just said on video, Brandon. Every threat. Every admission." "Ah," he looked at her, his face pale, then back at me. He realized the ground was shifting. The arrogance that usually clung to him like a second skin began to slough off, revealing the hollow, panicked child underneath. "You think this is a victory?" He spat, backing toward the door. "You have destroyed your own son. You have ruined this family. You did that the moment you decided my life was worth less than your commission," I replied. He turned and fled, the front door swinging wide, letting in the cool, damp night air. I didn't chase him. I watched him run toward his car, watched the taillights flare as he peeled away from the curb, tires screeching against the asphalt. I let the fire poker slide from my grip. It clattered loudly against the floor. Emily rushed to my side, her hand gripping my arm. We stood in the foyer, the quiet returning, save for the distant sound of the sirens getting louder, closer. "Are you all right?" she asked, her eyes searching mine. "I am tired, Emily," I said, the adrenaline beginning to drain away, leaving a hollow ache in my joints. "But for the first time in months, I can breathe." Buddy trotted over, nudging my hand with his cold, wet nose. I patted his head, feeling the coarse fur under my palm. The security panel continued to blink a soft, steady green, a testament to the fact that the house was now, finally, secure. We waited in the foyer as the flashing blue lights of the police cruisers flooded the driveway. The shadows on the wall shifted as officers approached the door, their heavy boots crunching on the gravel. I looked at Emily, then at the empty threshold where my son had just stood, and I knew that the hardest part of this journey was not the betrayal, but the realization that the man who had walked out that door was a stranger I had been calling my son for 29 years. The lead officer knocked on the door, a sharp, authoritative rap that signaled the beginning of the end of the life I had known. I turned the deadbolt, the metal mechanism clicking with finality. "Mr. Hayes?" the officer asked, stepping into the light. "We received a report about an attempted break-in at this address." "Yes," I said, stepping aside to let them in. "It was my son. And I have the evidence you need to keep him from ever doing this again." The officer looked at the security footage playing on the tablet Brandon had left behind on the table in his panic, a mistake he wouldn't recover from. I pointed to the device. "Everything is there. The threats. The admission. I want him arrested." The officer examined the screen, his eyebrows arching as he listened to Brandon's voice echoing in the small room. "We have enough here to bring him in for questioning, Mr. Hayes. We will handle the rest." As they moved through the house, collecting statements and dusting for prints, I walked to the kitchen and poured a glass of water. My hands were finally still. I drank it slowly, the cool liquid grounding me. Emily walked in a moment later, her face pale but composed. "They have his car in their database," she said. "They will find him." "I know," I replied. "Did you keep the drive?" She tapped her coat pocket. "It is safe. Eleanor is meeting us at the station in 20 minutes. I nodded, the weight of the night finally settling in. We walked out of the house together, leaving the lights on, not caring if the electricity bill spiked or if the neighbors whispered. The drive to the station was short. The city felt different tonight. Quieter, less oppressive. The secrets that had been choking the life out of my home were now out in the open, and the cold, hard reality of the law was beginning to close in around the person who had tried to bury me. When we pulled into the parking lot, Eleanor Vance was already waiting by the entrance, her briefcase in hand, her expression one of grim determination. She looked at the two of us, then at the police cruisers pulling in behind us, and she nodded once. "The statement from Dr. Evans reached the precinct office 5 minutes ago," she said, not bothering with pleasantries. "He gave them everything. The bank logs, the falsified signatures, the direct requests for medical manipulation. Brandon is trapped in a box of his own making." I felt a ghost of a smile. "Is he in custody?" "They are processing him now," she said. "He is not going anywhere." I looked up at the sky, where the stars were beginning to fade behind the creeping gray of dawn. The world was still turning. The sun was preparing to rise, and for the first time in my life, I felt that I wasn't just building a house. I was finally, truly, building a future. We stepped through the heavy glass doors of the station, the air inside conditioned and sterile. A sergeant approached us, clipboard in hand. "Mr. Hayes, your son has requested a lawyer, but he has been officially charged with fraud, attempted grand larceny, and conspiracy to commit medical malpractice. He is being held without bail." I looked at the sergeant, then at the long, dimly lit hallway that led to the holding cells. Somewhere down there, Brandon was sitting in a gray room, staring at a concrete wall, realizing that his grand design had collapsed into dust. "Thank you, Sergeant," I said. We walked into the interrogation room, where Eleanor began to lay out the final pieces of our case, her voice crisp and professional. I sat back, listening to the legal machinery grinding forward. Emily reached over and took my hand, her grip firm, a silent promise that we were through the worst of it. The interrogation continued for hours, but I barely registered the time, my mind already drifting toward the life I would reclaim once the locks were changed and the legal files were burned. A sharp buzz rang in my ears as the station doors slammed shut behind us. Charles kept his hand low on my back, his touch firm, but not painful. Eleanor Vance walked ahead, her heels clicking on the polished concrete. I glanced at the sergeant who had processed Brandon, his expression still stern as he watched us leave. "Do you think he will attempt to reach out from inside?" I asked, keeping my voice low so only Charles could hear. He shook his head slowly. "The bail denial means he stays locked until the hearing. His phone will be monitored, his visitors screened." Eleanor turned, her briefcase tucked under one arm. "We have filed the emergency motion to freeze his accounts. The judge approved it this morning. No money can leave those accounts without court approval." I felt a tight knot loosen in my chest. "What about the cruise payment? Can we get that back?" She smiled faintly. "The receipt is in evidence. We will request restitution as part of the settlement. It may take weeks, but the paper trail is clear." Charles nodded, his jaw kung-thung. "I just want Emily to be safe. Brandon's threats still linger." I swallowed, the memory of his shouted warning still vivid. He said I would regret crossing him. I don't know if he meant it legally or otherwise. Eleanor placed her hand on my shoulder. "We will request a protective order. Until then, stay with Charles. Change the route. Trust your instinct." We arrived at the parking lot, where a black sedan waited, its engine humming. Charles opened the back door for me, then got in beside me. Eleanor sat in the front passenger seat, pulling out a file as the driver merged into traffic. "Did you find anything new about Dr. Evans?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. Charles glanced at the folder. "His license is under review. The board received an anonymous tip about the falsified evaluation. They are asking for his notes." I felt a flicker of hope. If they revoke his credentials, his report loses weight. Eleanor lowered her voice. "We also have the audio from the hidden camera. The prosecutor wants to play it at the preliminary hearing. It shows Brandon coaching Evans on what to say." Charles's fingers tightened on the armrest. "Good. Let them hear his own words directing the lie." The car moved through downtown, buildings flashing past in gray streaks. I leaned my head against the cool window, feeling the vibration of the tires on the pavement. A thought tugged at me, persistent and quiet. I wondered if Brandon had any allies left on the outside, someone who could still pass a message. "Emily?" Charles spoke, his voice soft. "You look devastated." I blinked, turning back to look at him, just thinking about how fast everything is changing. One day we were planning a birthday dinner. The next we were in the courthouse waiting for a ruling. He reached over, squeezing my hand. "We will get through this. One step at a time." Eleanor spoke without looking up from the file. "The hearing is set for 2 weeks from Thursday. We will have all evidence ready by then. Until then, keep a low profile. Do not discuss the case online or with acquaintances." I nodded, the weight of her words settling like a stone in my stomach. "Will they allow me to testify?" She finally met my eyes. "If the judge deems it relevant, yes. Your observation of Brandon's behavior that night is valuable." The sedan slowed at a red light. I noticed a dark van idling 2 cars back, its windows tinted so dark I could not see inside. A faint unease prickled my skin, like the brush of a spider's leg. "Do you see that van?" I whispered, nodding toward the rear. Charles frowned, following my gaze. "It has been there since we left the station. Same plate as the one that lingered outside our house last Tuesday." Eleanor's eyes narrowed. "We should note the plate and report it. Could be a coincidence. Could be surveillance." I inhaled slowly, trying to calm the flutter in my chest. "If they are watching, what do they want?" Charles's voice was low, steady. "Maybe they think we still have something Brandon hid, or they want to intimidate us into dropping the case." The light turned green. The van did not move forward. It stayed where it was, engine idling. I felt my pulse quicken, not from fear alone, but from a surge of resolve. "We will not be shaken." Charles gave me a reassuring nod. "We have the law on our side, and we have each other." And Eleanor closed the folder with a soft snap. "Remember, the strongest evidence is the timeline. Every odd call, every strange sighting. Write it down. It builds a pattern." I told myself I would keep a small notebook in my purse, ready to jot down anything strange. The sedan turned onto a quieter street lined with maple trees, their leaves beginning to turn amber. The van fell back, disappearing into the flow of traffic. A quiet settled over us, broken only by the hum of the engine and the occasional sigh from Charles. I glanced at him, seeing the fatigue etched around his eyes, yet also a stubborn set to his mouth. "Do you think we will ever get back to normal?" I asked, my voice softer than I intended. He turned his head, his gaze meeting mine. "Normal may look different, but we will find a peace that lasts." The car eased into our driveway, the gravel crunching under the tires. I stepped out, inhaling the crisp evening air that carried the scent of damp earth and distant wood smoke. Charles followed, stretching his shoulders as if shaking off a weight. Eleanor stayed in the vehicle, her window rolled down. "Call me if anything feels off. Even a small detail could matter." I waved, watching the sedan pull away and turn the corner. The streetlights flickered on one by one, casting long shadows across the pavement. As we walked toward the front door, a sudden rustle came from the bushes beside the walkway. I froze, hand instinctively moving to Charles's arm. A sleek black cat darted out, eyes gleaming in the low light before vanishing into the night. I let out a breath I did not realize I had been holding. Charles chuckled softly. "Just a night prowler. Nothing to worry about." I forced a smile, though my thoughts lingered on the van and the feeling that someone somewhere was still watching. We entered the house, the familiar creak of the floorboards greeting us. I flicked on the hallway light, the warm glow spilling onto the runner rug. Buddy, our golden retriever, rose from his bed with a wagging tail, his ears perked at our arrival. "Hey there, Buddy," I said, kneeling to scratch behind his ears. He leaned into my touch, his body warm and solid. Charles hung his coat on the rack, his sigh audible. "Let's get some tea. I think we all need a moment." I headed to the kitchen, filling the kettle with water. The hiss of the flame as it caught sounded like a small promise. While waiting, I wiped the counter, feeling the smooth surface under my palm, a simple act that grounded me. The kettle began to sing, a bright whistle that filled the room. I poured the hot water into 2 cups, adding a slice of lemon to each. Steam curled upward, carrying a faint citrus scent. I carried the cups to the living room, setting one on the coffee table beside Charles's chair. He took it, his fingers brushing mine briefly. "Thank you," he murmured. I sat on the sofa, pulling my legs up under me. Buddy rested his head on my knee, his breathing even and calm. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the window panes softly. I listened to that sound, letting it fill the silence between us. A thought slipped in, unbidden but clear. If Brandon's network reaches further than we know, we must stay vigilant without letting fear dictate our lives. I lifted my cup, feeling the warmth seep into my palms. "To moving forward," I said, voice steady. Charles clinked his cup against mine. "To moving forward." We drank, the tea hot and soothing, as the house settled into a quiet evening. The clock on the mantel ticked steadily, each second a reminder that time continued, indifferent to our turmoil but offering us the chance to rebuild. I glanced at the darkening sky through the window, the first stars appearing like distant promises. A soft knock sounded at the front door, unexpected and sharp. I set my cup down, heart tightening. "Who could that be at this hour?" I whispered, more to myself than anyone else. Charles rose, his expression wary. "I will see." He crossed the room, his steps measured, and reached for the door. I stayed on the sofa, Buddy lifting his head, ears twitching. The door opened a fraction, revealing a figure silhouetted against the porch light. I could not make out details, only the shape of a coat and a glint of metal in their hand. My breath caught, the familiar surge of adrenaline flashing through me. "Charles, be careful," I urged, though my voice sounded thin even to my ears. He paused, hand on the knob, and turned his head slightly toward me. "Stay back," he said low. Then he pulled the door open fully, and the person stepped inside, closing it behind them with a soft click that seemed too loud in the quiet room. I wondered who waited beyond the door. The wood swung inward, and a figure stepped inside, coat brushing the floor, a glint of metal catching the hallway light. Charles stepped forward, his hand outstretched, voice low but firm. "State your business," he said. The stranger lifted a hand, revealing a small metal case. "I'm Jules Porter," he said. "I work for Eleanor Vance. She asked me to bring this." He set the case on the coffee table and clicked it open. Inside lay a slim external drive and a folded sheet of paper. I felt a flicker of hope, but kept my voice steady. "What is it?" I asked. Jules glanced at the paper, then at us. "It's the drive from Charles's old desktop. Eleanor asked me to try to recover anything that might have been wiped." He lifted the drive, plugging it into the laptop Charles kept on the side table. The screen flickered to life, showing a folder labeled Old Projects. I leaned closer, my heart beating faster than I liked to admit. Charles typed a few commands, and the folder expanded to reveal several subfolders. One caught my eye. Medical Evils. I pointed at it without speaking. Charles opened it, and a list of PDFs appeared. Jules leaned in, his brow furrowed. "These look like scans," he muttered. Charles double-clicked the top file. A scanned document filled the screen, the letterhead of Dr. Evans' clinic visible at the top. The text was a preliminary assessment stating that Charles showed early signs of cognitive decline. My stomach tightened. I forced myself to speak. "Does it look altered?" I asked. Jules tapped the screen. The timestamp shows today's date, but the file properties say it was created 3 months ago. Charles frowned. That doesn't match. I leaned back, trying to keep my voice even. If someone changed the date, they could be trying to make it look recent. Jules nodded. Exactly. And look here. He pointed to a signature line at the bottom. The name Dr. Evans was there, but the signature looked different from the one we had seen on the official letter. I felt a chill run down my arms. Charles turned to me, his eyes serious. We need to see if there's anything else. He opened another folder labeled Audio Notes. Inside was a single file named Meeting Dr. Evans, MP3. I swallowed. Play it, I said. Jules clicked play. A low voice filled the room, unmistakably Brandon's. Doctor, I need you to state that my father lacks capacity to manage his estate. Make it sound thorough, but keep it plausible. A pause. Then Dr. Evans replied, I can do that, but I need something to justify it. Brandon's voice came again, cold and deliberate. I'll pay you extra. Just make sure the report says he's unable to handle money or property. The recording ended with a faint click. I stared at the screen, my breath shallow. Charles's hand tightened on the laptop edge. He's been bribing the doctor, he whispered. Jules looked between us, his expression grim. We have concrete proof now. This changes everything. I felt a spark of hope, but also a rush of fear. What if he knows we have this? I asked. Jules shrugged. He might already be watching. Just then, the front door slammed open with a force that made the lamp on the side table shake. Brandon stood in the doorway, his face tight, eyes flashing. In his hand, he gripped a golf club, the metal glinting under the light. I swallowed hard, my pulse pounding in my ears. What are you doing here? Charles asked, voice steady, despite the tension. Brandon's lips curled into a sneer. I came to see what you two are hiding. He stepped farther inside, the club lowered but still ready. I rose from the sofa, keeping my voice even. We found something you didn't want us to see. Brandon laughed, a short, harsh sound. You think a little recording changes anything? I already have the papers ready. He glanced at the laptop, then at the drive. Give it back, and maybe I'll forget you ever looked. Charles stepped forward, his stance firm. We won't give it back. We'll give it to the court. Brandon's eyes narrowed, the club tightening and his grip tightening. You don't understand what you're messing with. I felt the room shrink, the air thick. Jules moved slightly to the side, his hands open, showing he wasn't a threat. Everyone, stay calm, he said softly. I could hear my own heartbeat, loud and urgent. The clock on the mantel ticked, each second a reminder that time was running out. I glanced at the drive, then back at Brandon. We'll see who really doesn't understand, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Brandon's jaw clenched, and for a moment, I thought he might swing. Then he lowered the club just an inch, his gaze flicking to the door as if expecting someone else. You'll regret this, he muttered, before turning and stalking out, the door closing behind him with a soft thud. I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. Jules picked up the drive, slipping it back into its case. We should get this to Eleanor right away, he said. I nodded, feeling the weight of the evidence settle in my hands. Charles placed a hand on my shoulder, his grip firm. We're not done yet, he murmured. I looked at the empty doorway, the hallway beyond dim and quiet. A thought sparked, sharp and clear. If we could prove this in court, maybe we could finally protect what mattered most. I squeezed his hand, ready for whatever came next. Let's get this to Eleanor right away. I slipped the drive into my purse and glanced at Charles, whose jaw was still tight from the confrontation. He nodded, his eyes scanning the parking lot for any sign of Brandon's car. The engine of our sedan purred to life as we pulled away from the house, the morning sun catching the dust on the driveway. I glanced at the rearview mirror, half expecting to see a dark sedan lurking behind us. The road stretched ahead, lined with oak trees that cast shifting shadows on the pavement. A soft jazz tune played from the radio, its melody at odds with the tight knot in my stomach. Charles kept his hands steady on the wheel, his knuckles whitening just a fraction. "We need to make sure no one follows us," he murmured, voice low enough that only I could hear. I swallowed, feeling the weight of the tiny metal case against my thigh. A sudden flash of silver caught my eye. A car tailing us at a distance, its brake lights flashing intermittently. My pulse quickened, but I forced myself to stay calm. "Did you see that?" I whispered, leaning closer to him. He glanced in the mirror, then back at the road. "Yeah. Stay steady." He eased off the accelerator just enough to create a gap, then let the car glide forward. The pursuit seemed to falter, the other vehicle falling back as we turned onto a quieter side street. Relief washed over me, but it was fleeting. My mind raced with possibilities. Had Brandon anticipated our move? Had he hired someone to watch us? I pushed the thoughts aside and focused on the road ahead. We arrived at Eleanor's office building a few minutes later, the glass doors reflecting the clear sky. A receptionist greeted us with a polite smile, her badge glinting under the fluorescent lights. "Good morning, Miss Hayes. Mr. Vance is expecting you." We followed her down a hallway lined with framed law degrees and polished wood panels. Eleanor's office door stood ajar, revealing a space filled with towering bookshelves and a large oak desk covered in files. She looked up as we entered, her expression a mix of concern and determination. "Thank you for coming so quickly," she said, standing to shake Charles's hand. Her grip was firm, her eyes sharp. "I've been reviewing the material you gave me yesterday. It looks promising, but we need to be careful." I felt a flicker of irritation at the word careful, but I kept my tone even. "We have the drive with the audio recording and the altered medical documents." I placed the purse on the desk and opened it, revealing the small metal case. Eleanor lifted the lid, her fingers brushing the sleek surface. She slid the drive into her laptop, the screen lighting up as the file loaded. A waveform appeared, then Brandon's voice filled the room, clear and chilling. I listened, my heart pounding, as he instructed the doctor to declare me incapacitated. The words felt like a blade twisting in my gut. When the recording ended, Eleanor leaned back, her face solemn. "This is solid proof of coercion," she said. "We can use it to challenge the guardianship petition outright." Charles exhaled slowly, the tension in his shoulders easing just a fraction. "What about the financial transfer?" he asked. She tapped a few keys, pulling up a spreadsheet that showed the $30,000 transfer from Charles's account to a shell corporation linked to Brandon. "We have a paper trail that shows the money never reached any legitimate investment. It went straight into an account Brandon controls." I felt a surge of relief, mixed with lingering dread. "And what about Dr. Evans?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Eleanor's gaze hardened. "We have the email exchange where he agrees to falsify the report for payment. We also have the audio of Brandon bribing him. Together they show a clear pattern of fraud." A sudden crash echoed from the hallway outside, making us all jump. The receptionist's voice came through the door, strained. "I'm sorry. There's been an alert. Someone tried to force the back door." Eleanor sprang to her feet, her hand moving to the phone on her desk. "Stay here," she ordered, her voice low but commanding. She slipped out, closing the door softly behind her. Charles turned to me, his expression grave. "We need to be ready for anything." I nodded, feeling the weight of the drive in my purse like a promise and a threat. Minutes later, Eleanor returned, her face pale but resolute. The security team apprehended the intruder. He claimed he was just a lost delivery driver, but the badge he showed was fake. She slipped a folded piece of paper across the desk. This is a copy of the security log. It shows the attempt happened just as we were reviewing the evidence. I scanned the log, noting the timestamp matched the moment we had played the recording. A chill through me. Had Brandon sent someone to intimidate us? We need to move fast, Eleanor said, sliding a printed copy of the guardianship petition toward us. I'll file an emergency motion to dismiss based on fraud and coercion. We'll also request an immediate freeze on Brandon's accounts. Charles picked up the document, his fingers tracing the printed lines. And if they try to move the money again, we'll have a temporary restraining order ready, she replied. The judge will hear us first thing tomorrow morning. I felt a spark of hope flicker amidst the fear. What about Emily's safety? I asked, glancing at Eleanor. She gave me a small, reassuring smile. I'll have a deputy escort you both home. We'll keep a watch on the property until this is resolved. The office door opened again, and a uniformed officer stepped in, his badge glinting. Ma'am, we've secured the perimeter. You're free to go. Eleanor thanked him, then turned to us. Let's get you back to your house. I'll meet you there in an hour, with the final paperwork. We gathered our things, the metal case feeling heavier now that its contents were exposed to the light. As we stepped into the hallway, I glanced back at Eleanor's office. The rows of law books standing like silent sentinels. The drive home was quieter. The tension eased but not gone. Charles drove with steady hands, his gaze flicking to the rearview mirror every few seconds. I watched the trees blur past, my mind replaying the doctor's voice, Brandon's cold bargain, and the sudden intrusion at the lawyer's office. A thought flickered, unbidden but persistent. What if the person who tried to break in was just the beginning? I pushed it aside, focusing on the immediate task, getting the evidence to the judge before Brandon could spin another lie. We pulled up to our driveway, the familiar sight of our home offering a small comfort. Buddy bounded out to greet us, his tail wagging furiously, his ears flopping as he circled our feet. I laughed, the sound bright and sudden, breaking the tension that had coiled tight all morning. Emma, our neighbor, waved from her porch, holding a steaming mug. "Everything okay?" she called, concern etched on her face. I waved back, forcing a smile. "We're fine, thanks. Just had a rough morning." She nodded, disappearing back inside as we stepped onto the porch. Charles set down his bag, then knelt to scratch behind Buddy's ears. The dog leaned into his touch, eyes soft and trusting. I slipped the drive from my purse and placed it on the kitchen counter, the metal gleaming under the pendant light. Eleanor's car pulled up a few minutes later, its headlights sweeping across the driveway. She stepped out carrying a folder thick with papers. "Ready?" she asked, her voice steady. I nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on my shoulders like a familiar coat. "Let's finish this." We moved to the dining room, spreading the documents across the table. Eleanor pointed to specific clauses, her finger tracing lines of legal jargon that suddenly felt like weapons rather than obstacles. Charles leaned in, his brow furrowed as he absorbed each detail. I watched him, seeing the resolve in his jaw. The same determination that had driven him to design towering buildings now turned toward protecting his legacy. A soft chime echoed from my phone, a text from an unknown number. I hesitated, then glanced at the screen. The message read simply, "Meet me at the old mill tonight. Bring the drive." My stomach dropped. I looked up to see Charles and Eleanor watching me, their expressions a mix of curiosity and caution. I swallowed, the words forming in my throat before I could stop them. "Who is this?" I asked, my voice barely louder than a whisper. Charles reached over, placing a reassuring hand on mine. "We'll handle it together." Eleanor's eyes narrowed slightly. "Don't go alone. Let's bring a deputy." I nodded, feeling the spark of a new question ignite in my mind. Who was reaching out? And what did they truly want? The night ahead felt suddenly uncertain. But the resolve in my chest was steadier than before. Brandon stepped onto the dock, his suitcase swinging at his side, and scanned the crowd for any sign of Charles. The sun glinted off the white hull of the cruise ship, and a brass band played a cheerful tune from the pier. I stood beside Charles, my hand resting on his arm, feeling the familiar tension knot in my stomach. Eleanor Vance hovered nearby, her lawyer's bag clutched tight, eyes flicking between the gangway and the approaching figure. "Dad," Brandon called, his voice bright and rehearsed. "I'm glad you could make it. I've got the papers ready for the transfer." He waved a thick envelope, the seal already broken. Charles's jaw tightened, but he kept his tone even. "Brandon, let's see those documents first." He held out his hand, palm up. Brandon's smile faltered for a heartbeat before he forced it wider. "Of course. Here. Everything's in order." He shoved the envelope toward Charles, his fingers brushing the older man's palm. I watched the exchange, my pulse hammering against my ribs. The envelope felt too light, too smooth, as if it held nothing but air. Charles flipped it open, his brow furrowing as he scanned the first page. "This isn't the cruise itinerary." He lifted his eyes, voice low but steady. "It looks like a power of attorney form." Brandon's eyes darted to the side, then back. "Just a precaution, Dad. In case anything happens while we're away." He laughed, a short, nervous sound. A sudden beep cut through the chatter. Eleanor's phone vibrated, and she glanced at the screen before tucking it away. "I've got something you need to see," she said, her voice firm but calm. She lifted a small tablet from her bag and tapped the screen. The dock's ambient noise seemed to dip as the video began to play on the tiny display. The image grainy, but clear enough to make out Brandon's face in a dim office. "Listen," Brandon whispered on the recording, his tone conspiratorial. "Move the cruise funds into the offshore account tonight. No one will notice until we're already at sea." The crowd around us murmured, heads turning toward the speaker. A woman in a sun hat covered her mouth, her eyes wide. Charles's hand shook slightly as he lowered the tablet. "Is this true?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper, but carrying across the planks. Brandon's face flushed, then paled. That's taken out of context. I was just..." "Context?" Eleanor interrupted, stepping forward. "You told Dr. Evans to declare him incapacitated so you could seize his assets. You paid him to falsify the evaluation." She held up another file, the pages fluttering in the sea breeze. A gasp rippled through the onlookers. Brandon's shoulders slumped, then jerked back as if bracing for a blow. "No," he snapped, his voice rising. "You're all wrong. I'm protecting the family's future." He thrust his chin out, eyes scanning for allies. I felt a surge of something hot and fierce rise in my chest. Not fear, but a fierce protectiveness for the man who had raised me. I stepped slightly in front of Charles, my voice firm. "You used Mom's trust to line your own pockets. You lied to everyone who loved you." Brandon's gaze flicked to me, then to Emily. "Wait, that's me. My name is Emily." I swallowed, feeling the weight of every whispered doubt and sleepless night finally find shape. "Emily," Brandon said, his tone suddenly sweet. "You don't understand the pressure I'm under. Dad's getting old. He can't. Save it." I cut in, my words sharp as a knife. "You've already shown us who you are." A sudden shout erupted from the crowd. "Police!" a man yelled, pointing toward the end of the dock where two uniformed officers approached, their badges catching the light. Brandon's eyes widened, then hardened. "You'll regret this," he snarled, backing away from the gangway. One officer stepped forward, hand resting on his holster. "Brandon Hayes, you're under arrest for fraud and conspiracy to commit elder abuse." He glanced at the tablet in Eleanor's hand. "We've got the warrant. Brandon's shoulders dropped, the fight draining from him as the officers moved to cuff him. He glanced at Charles one last time, his lips forming a silent threat I could almost hear. "You'll pay for this." The officers led him away, his suitcase abandoned on the dock, its contents spilling out, stacks of cash, a passport, a notebook filled with names and numbers. A few curious onlookers bent to scoop up the bills, but most just watched, murmuring among themselves. Charles exhaled slowly, his shoulders relaxing for the first time since we arrived. He turned to me, his eyes soft. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice rough. I nodded, feeling a tear trace a warm path down my cheek. Not from sorrow, but from relief. "I'm fine," I said, squeezing his arm. "Let's go home." Eleanor fell into step beside us, her expression thoughtful. "We'll need to file the motions to freeze his accounts today," she said. "And Dr. Evans will be hearing from the Bar Association." Charles gave a small, grateful smile. "Thank you. Both of you. I don't know what I'd have done without you." I glanced back at the ship, its horn sounding a mournful note as it prepared to depart without the man who had tried to steal its promise. The sea breeze carried the scent of salt and diesel, and for the first time in weeks, I felt the weight on my chest lift, replaced by a cautious hope. A dull throb pulsed behind my left ear as the phone rang on the kitchen counter. I glanced at the screen and saw Eleanor Vance's name flashing. My heart hammered, but I forced my breath to stay even. "Emily?" she asked, voice steady. "The court just entered the final order. Brandon's accounts are frozen, and the judge approved the protective order you requested." I swallowed, feeling the tightness in my chest ease a fraction. "Thank you. His lawyer will file a notice of appeal within 10 days, Eleanor replied. "We'll prepare a response. In the meantime, Charles has regained authority over the trust and the house. The bank released the funds to him yesterday." I pictured Charles signing papers at his desk, the familiar weight of relief settling on his shoulders. "And the cruise passengers?" I asked. "They received full refunds yesterday," Eleanor said. "The line issued a statement thanking you and Charles for bringing the fraud to light. Brandon's name appears in the report as the sole defendant." A small smile tugged at my lips despite the ache still lingering behind my ear. "I'm glad they weren't left stranded." "The process isn't over," Eleanor cautioned. "Brandon may try to drag this out, but the evidence is solid. Focus on rebuilding what you can." I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. "I will." I ended the call and set the phone down, the silence in the kitchen feeling both heavy and hopeful. Later that morning, I walked into the spare bedroom that had become Brandon's makeshift office. The desk sat empty, the chair pulled away. A single sheet of paper clung to the edge of the drawer, a printout of the email thread where he'd instructed Dr. Evans to falsify the evaluation. I picked it up, the paper thin between my fingers, and slipped it into a folder labeled Evidence. I would give a copy to Eleanor later, but for now, I needed to clear the space. I opened the closet and pulled out a box of clothes I'd packed weeks ago, before I knew the full extent of his deceit. Each item carried a faint scent of his cologne, a reminder of the man I'd thought I knew. I folded them carefully and placed them in a donation bag. The act felt less like loss and more like reclamation. A soft knock sounded at the front door. I wiped my hands on my jeans and opened it to find Charles holding a mug of tea. His eyes were tired, but softer than they'd been in months. "Thought you might like this," he said, offering the cup. I took it, feeling the warmth seep into my palms. "Thanks," I replied. "How did the meeting with the bank go?" "They released the remaining assets into my name," he said. "I've started transferring the money back into the trust. It'll take a few weeks to settle everything, but the house is secure again." I sipped the tea, the chamomile grounding me. "What about the house?" I asked. "Do you want to keep it as is, or make changes?" He looked out the window at the backyard where Buddy chased a squirrel. "I think we'll keep it for now," he said. "Maybe repaint the study. It needs a fresh start, just like us." I smiled, feeling a flicker of optimism. "I've been looking into a small design studio downtown. They're looking for an assistant. I could start party time. See if I enjoy it." His eyebrows rose. "That sounds wonderful. You've always had an eye for detail." I nodded, the idea sparking a quiet excitement. "I'll send my portfolio today." We fell into a comfortable silence, broken only by Buddy's happy bark as he dropped a soggy tennis ball at our feet. I laughed, bending to toss it again. The simple joy of the moment felt like a promise that the worst was behind us. Microhook, around 500 words. Later that afternoon, I sat at the dining room table spreading out sketches of a living room remodel I'd dreamed up for a client. The phone buzzed again, this time with an unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. "Hello?" I said. Voice cautious. A man's voice, low and urgent, replied. "Is this Emily Hayes? I have something you need to see. Meet me at the old mill tonight. 10 o'clock. Come alone." My stomach tightened. The old mill was the place Brandon had tried to lure me to weeks ago, before his arrest. I glanced at Charles, who was reading in the living room. His posture relaxed. "I'll think about it," I said, buying time. The line went dead. I set the phone down, my mind racing. Could this be another trick? Or did someone truly have new evidence? I needed to tell Charles, but I also didn't want to alarm him unnecessarily. End microhookah. I decided to wait until after dinner to bring it up. We ate a simple meal of grilled chicken and steamed vegetables, Buddy begging for scraps under the table. The conversation flowed easily. Charles talked about a new project he was pitching. I mentioned the design studio interview, and we laughed at Buddy's insistence on stealing a sock from the laundry basket. After we cleared the plates, I leaned back in my chair and lowered my voice. "I got a strange call today," I said. "Someone claimed they have something I need to see at the old mill tonight." Charles's eyebrows furrowed. "Did they say what?" "No," I replied. "Just that I should come alone." He set his fork down, his expression serious. "That sounds like a setup. Brandon's allies might still be trying to intimidate us." "I thought about that," I said. "But what if it's legitimate? What if they have proof that could help us close this case once and for all?" He reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Whatever you decide, I'll be with you. If you go, I'll drop you off and wait nearby. If you'd rather not, we'll hand the information to Eleanor and let her handle it." I felt a surge of gratitude. His steady presence made the uncertainty less frightening. "I'll think about it overnight," I said, "and talk to Eleanor first thing in the morning." He nodded, and we retreated to the living room, where Buddy curled up at my feet. The house settled into a quiet hum, the kind that felt like a fresh page waiting to be written. Second micro hook. Around 900 words. The next morning, I drove to Eleanor's office with a printed copy of the suspicious call log. She greeted me with a calm smile and ushered me into her conference room. "I've been expecting something like this," she said, sitting opposite me. "Brandon's network doesn't disappear overnight." I handed her the paper. "They want me to meet at the old mill tonight. Alone." She scanned the log, then looked up. "Do you feel safe going?" I hesitated. "I'm not sure. Part of me wants to see what they have, but another part worries it's a trap." Eleanor tapped her pen thoughtfully. "Let's not risk it. I'll send a trusted investigator to the mill with a recorder. If there's anything genuine, we'll capture it. If it's a ploy, we'll have evidence of intimidation." Relief washed over me. "Thank you," I said. "I appreciate you looking out for us." She stood and walked to the window, watching the street below. "Your safety comes first. Remember, You've already done the hard part, getting the truth into the light. Now we just need to protect what we've rebuilt. I left her office feeling steadier, the weight of uncertainty lifting a fraction. Back at the car, I glanced at the rearview mirror and saw Buddy's head poking out from the passenger seat, his tail thumping softly against the door. A small laugh escaped me. End second microhook. That evening I sat on the porch with Charles. A blanket draped over our legs as the sun dipped below the horizon. Buddy rested his chin on my knee, his breathing slow and even. "We've come a long way," Charles said, his voice low. "I never imagined I'd have to fight my own son for what I built." I turned my head to look at him, and I never thought I'd find strength I didn't know I possessed. I squeezed his hand. "Whatever comes next, we'll face it together." He nodded, his eyes reflecting the fading light. "Tomorrow, we'll start the paperwork for the studio. And maybe, just maybe, we'll begin that garden you've always wanted." I smiled, imagining rows of lavender and rosemary lining the walkway. "That sounds perfect." A distant chirp of crickets filled the air, and for the first time in months, I felt the quiet settle not as emptiness but as possibility. The night deepened, stars appearing one by one, and I knew the story wasn't over. It was simply turning toward a new chapter. My pulse quickened as the sound of the front door latch clicking echoed through the quiet house. I moved toward the entrance, my hand gripping a heavy brass letter opener I had grabbed from the hall table, while Charles followed closely, his face a mask of iron determination. "Who is there?" Charles called out, his voice steady despite the tension radiating from his posture. The door creaked open, revealing a man drenched in rain, his coat collar pulled high against the night air. He held his hands up in a gesture of peace, his eyes darting quickly around the foyer before settling on me. It was the man from the old mill, the one who had contacted me about the secondary set of files. "I told you I had the copies," the man said, his voice raspy and shaking. "You need to take them now." Before he figures out I took them from his storage unit. "Why come here?" I asked, keeping my distance. "We agreed to handle this through our attorney." He laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "Eleanor Vance is being watched. Brandon has people everywhere, even if he is sitting in a cell. He has connections that go deeper than the police can reach. I cannot be seen near a lawyer's office." Charles took a step forward, his shadow looming large against the hallway wall. "Then how do we know this isn't another trap? You were working for him for years. Why change your mind now?" The stranger reached into his inner pocket and pulled out a slim memory stick, placing it carefully on the console table. "Because I found out what he was planning to do with the insurance policy once he secured guardianship. He wasn't just going to put you in a home, Charles. He was going to sell your designs to your biggest competitor and then leave you penniless. He never cared about the legacy. He only cared about the use." I felt the air leave my lungs. Brandon had been calculating even the smallest details of our ruin. I looked at Charles, whose face had gone pale, his hands trembling at his sides. "I need you to leave," Charles said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "If you are lying to us, I will ensure every authority in this state knows exactly where to find you." The man nodded, backing away toward the darkness of the porch. "Check the drive. The password is the date your architecture firm first opened." I am done being his errand boy. He vanished into the rain before I could ask another question. I stared at the memory stick, the plastic casing cold against the polished wood of the table. "Do we open it?" I asked, my voice barely above a breath. Charles reached out, his thumb brushing over the surface of the drive. "We do not wait for the morning. If this confirms what he just said about the design theft, then Brandon has been sabotaging my reputation for years, not just recently." We hurried to the study, the click of the computer keyboard sounding like thunder in the silent house. The screen flickered, showing a folder labeled with dates and project names. As I clicked on a file labeled Legacy Theft, a series of documents appeared. proving that Brandon had been leaking proprietary information to my firm's main rival for over 3 years. He had been intentionally slowing down our production schedule to drive the board to vote for his own business proposals. "The snake," Charles muttered, leaning back as if he had been physically struck. He was stripping the company apart while I was still teaching him the basics of the trade. "We have to get this to the police tonight," I said, feeling a surge of adrenaline. "This isn't just about the guardianship anymore. This is about total corporate sabotage." The phone rang, shattering the quiet. I grabbed it, seeing the name of the jail's outgoing call service. It was Brandon. "I know you have the drive," Brandon's voice came through, sounding polished and devoid of the panic he had shown at the docks. "That guy is a thief and a liar. You shouldn't trust a word he says." "You are in a cell, Brandon," I snapped, my finger hovering over the record button on my phone. "How are you even making this call?" "I have friends, Emily," he replied, his tone shifting into that condescending, sharp cadence I had come to despise. "The evidence on that drive is inadmissible because it was stolen from a private storage unit. If you try to use it in court, Eleanor will be disbarred for handling illegal property. Don't be a fool. Bring me the drive, and I might make sure your name isn't dragged through the mud when this is over." "You have nothing left to trade," I said, staring at Charles. "I have plenty," Brandon hissed. "Check your email." I opened the laptop, seeing a new message from an unknown sender. It was a photograph of Charles's childhood home, taken from inside the property line, with a timestamp from an hour ago. "You are playing with fire," I said, my voice shaking with rage. "This is not going to save you." "It is not meant to save me," he countered. "It is meant to keep you busy, while my team cleans up the rest of the evidence." The line went dead, leaving us in a hollow, ringing silence. I looked at the photograph on the screen, then at Charles. He wasn't looking at the screen. He was looking at the front window, where the silhouette of a vehicle began to slowly roll past our gate. The morning sun brushed the kitchen table with a warm glow as I poured 2 cups of coffee. The aroma filled the room and seemed to push back the lingering chill that had settled in the house since the trial. Emily sat opposite me, her hands wrapped around a mug, her eyes soft but alert. She had been quieter these past days, the weight of everything we had endured settling into a quiet determination. I took a sip and let the warmth spread through my chest before speaking. "I thought we could take a short drive today. Just the 2 of us. Maybe drive out to the coast. Find a quiet spot where we can talk without the world pressing in." Emily lifted her gaze, a faint smile touching her lips. "I would like that. It has been a while since we simply drove without a plan." She paused, her fingers tapping lightly on the ceramic. "I have been thinking about what comes next for me. About finding work that feels like mine. Not just something I fell into because of everything else." I nodded, appreciating her honesty. "You deserve to build something that reflects who you are. If there is anything I can do to help, whether it's making a call or just listening, let me know." My voice stayed calm, the measured tone I had cultivated over years of presenting plans to clients and standing before city councils. She reached across the table and gave my hand a brief squeeze. "Thank you, Charles. It means a lot to hear you say that. I've been looking at small studios downtown, places where I could start designing interiors on my own terms. It feels scary, but also exciting." Her voice grew steadier as she spoke, the hesitation that had marked her early days with Brandon fading into a firmer resolve. I smiled, letting an architectural metaphor slip in as I often did when thinking about foundations. A house stands strong when its foundation is solid. Your career can be the same. Lay each brick with care, and the structure will hold. I could see the thought settle in her mind, a quiet acknowledgement that she was capable of building something new. We finished our coffee and moved to the garage where I pulled out the old sedan, its paint faded but its engine reliable. Emily slipped into the passenger seat, her eyes scanning the road ahead as we pulled out of the driveway. The city faded behind us, replaced by open roads lined with trees beginning to show the first hints of autumn color. After about an hour of driving, We pulled into a small coastal town where the scent of salt mixed with pine. We parked near a quiet stretch of beach where the sand was soft and the waves whispered against the shore. I turned off the engine, and we looked at my daughter-in-law as we stepped out, the sand cool under our shoes. This place reminds me of the projects I used to draft near the waterfront, I said, gesturing toward the horizon where the sky met the sea. There is a certain rhythm to the tide that reminds me of the cycles we go through in life: ebb, flow, then return. Emily laughed softly, the sound light and genuine. I never thought I'd find peace in a place like this. Back when I was with Brandon, the beach always felt like a place to escape, but never to stay. She walked a few steps ahead, her shoes sinking slightly into the damp sand. Now it feels like a place to begin again. We walked side by side, the rhythm of our steps matching the gentle roll of the waves. Every so often she would pause to pick up a smooth stone or a piece of driftwood, examining it before slipping it into her pocket. I watched her, noting how her shoulders had relaxed, how the tightness around her eyes had eased. After a while we found a sheltered spot behind a low dune where we could sit without being seen. I unfolded a small blanket we had brought, and we sat down, facing the ocean. The wind tugged at our hair, carrying with it the distant cry of gulls. "Do you ever think about what you would have done differently?" Emily asked, her voice low, as if she were afraid the wind might steal her words. I considered the question carefully, the way I would weigh load bearings on a bridge. I have spent a lot of time wondering if I missed signs, if I could have changed the course of things sooner. But I have also learned that dwelling on the past does not rebuild the present. It is better to learn from what happened and then move forward with clearer eyes. I glanced at her, my tone steady but warm. "What about you?" She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear before answering. "I used to think love meant staying no matter what. Now I see that love also means knowing when to walk away from something that harms you. I am learning to trust my own judgment again." Her eyes met mine, and I saw a spark of the woman she had been before the marriage, a woman who dreamed of creating spaces that made people feel at home. I reached out and placed my hand over hers, the contact simple and sincere. "You have already shown great strength. Whatever you decide to build, I will be here to support it. Not as an authority figure, but as a friend who believes in you." She squeezed my hand in return, a silent acknowledgement passing between us. The sun began its slow descent, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. We sat in companionable silence for a while, listening to the surf, each of us lost in our own thoughts, yet connected by the shared moment. When the light began to fade, we gathered our things and headed back to the car. As we walked, Emily paused near a cluster of rocks where a tide pool had formed. She knelt, her fingers brushing the water gently, and then she lifted a small seashell that lay half buried in the sand. It was smooth, its spiral catching the last light and glowing with a soft pink hue. She turned it over in her palm, a smile spreading across her face. "This is a perfect keepsake," she said, her voice soft but sure, a reminder of how calm can follow any disruption. I watched her slip the shell into her pocket, feeling a quiet hope settle in my chest. We continued toward the car, the evening air growing cooler, and I felt certain that whatever path lay ahead, we would walk it together, step by step. I slammed the car door shut as Charles turned the key in the ignition, the engine humming to life after our quiet walk on the beach. Emily, still holding the pink seashell in her palm, glanced at him and smiled. "You seem lighter today," she said, her voice soft but steady. Charles nodded, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. "The exhibition this morning reminded me why I love design," he replied. "Seeing those young architects sketch ideas made me think about legacy in a new way." Emily tucked the keepsake into her pocket and turned to face him more fully. "Did you speak with Counselor Vance about the will?" she asked. Charles exhaled slowly, his hands resting lightly on the steering wheel. "I did," She agreed to help me remove Brandon's name entirely and to set up a charitable trust instead, he said. The trust will support families affected by financial exploitation, especially elders. A thought sparked in Emily's mind, and she leaned forward slightly. That sounds meaningful. Have you decided what to call it? Charles glanced at her, a faint smile forming. I'm thinking of naming it the Hayes Family Support Fund. It feels right to turn pain into purpose. Emily's shoulders relaxed, the tightness she had carried for months easing a fraction. I like that. It gives the name a future, not just a past. She paused, remembering the seashell she had just pocketed. Speaking of futures, I've been thinking about my own path. Charles turned his head, curiosity evident in his gaze. What's on your mind? Emily took a breath, the words forming as she spoke. I want to start my own interior design studio. Not just a side hobby, but a real business where I can create spaces that make people feel safe and welcomed. Charles's expression shifted from surprise to encouragement. That's wonderful. You have an eye for detail and a heart for comfort. I'll support you however I can, whether that's listening to ideas or helping you meet the right people. Emily felt a warmth spread through her chest, genuine and unguarded. Thank you. It means a lot to hear that from you. She glanced at the seashell again, its pink hue catching the morning light. This little shell reminded me that beauty can emerge after a storm. I want my work to be that reminder for others. Charles chuckled softly, the sound low and genuine. You already are that reminder, Emily. Watching you rebuild yourself has been the brightest part of this whole ordeal. A comfortable silence settled between them, broken only by the occasional hum of tires on pavement. As they approached the suburban streets lined with maple trees, Emily noticed a familiar billboard advertising a local design workshop. Look, she said, pointing. They're offering a weekend course on sustainable materials next month. Charles slowed the car to read the sign. That could be a good start. Why don't you sign up? I'll watch Buddy while you're away. Emily's eyes lit up. Really? You'd do that? Charles nodded, his tone firm yet kind. Of course. You deserve the chance to grow, and I'll be here cheering you on. She reached over and gave his hand a brief squeeze. Thanks, Charles. I feel like I'm finally stepping onto solidified in hand. Thanks, Charles. I feel like I'm finally stepping onto solid ground again. The car turned onto their street, and Buddy greeted them with excited barks from the front yard. Emily opened the door and stepped out, the seashell warm in her pocket. I'll go inside and look up that workshop right now, she announced, heading toward the house. Charles watched her go, then turned to Buddy, who was wagging his tail furiously. Looks like we both have a new project ahead, he murmured to the dog, who responded with a happy bark. Inside, Emily dropped her bag on the hallway table and pulled out her laptop. She typed quickly, searching for the workshop details, her fingers moving with purpose. A notification popped up, an email from Mr. Vance with the subject line, "Trust documents ready for review." She opened it, reading the outline of the charitable fund Charles had described. The words brought a steady calm, the kind that comes when a plan feels both right and achievable. Just then, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. She frowned, glanced at the screen, and saw only a single line. You'll need more than hope to keep what's yours. Emily's breath caught for a heartbeat. Then she set the phone down and forced herself to focus on the screen in front of her. The seashell lay beside the keyboard, a small pink reminder that she had already begun to build something new. My heart hammered against my ribs as the phone buzzed on the kitchen table, a sharp buzz that made me jump. I glanced at the screen and saw an unknown number with a short message that read, "Stop digging or you will regret it." My stomach tightened and a cold sweat prickled my forehead. I swallowed hard and turned to Charles, who was sipping tea at the window. "Charles, look at this," I said, sliding the phone across the marble. He set his cup down and frowned at the screen. Who would send something like that? he asked, his voice low but steady. I have no idea, I replied, my voice tighter than I wanted. It came right after I saw the billboard for the design workshop. Charles leaned forward, his brow furrowed. We should tell Eleanor right away. She might be able to trace the number. I nodded, feeling a mix of fear and determination. I'll call her now. I pressed the call button and waited as the line rang. Eleanor's voice came through calm and professional. Emily, what's wrong? She asked. I just got a threatening text, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. It says to stop digging, or I will regret it. There was a brief pause before she replied. Do you have the number? I read it aloud, each digit feeling like a weight. It's a prepaid line, registered to a store near the county jail. Eleanor's tone sharpened. That matches the pattern we saw with Brandon's associates. I'll have my investigator look into it immediately. In the meantime, stay inside and keep the doors locked. Thank you, I said, relief mixing with lingering anxiety. I'll let Charles know. I hung up and turned to Charles, who was already standing. We should not let fear keep us from the truth, he said, placing a hand on my shoulder. I agree, I replied, but I can't shake the feeling that someone is watching us. He smiled gently. Then we will watch back. We decided to drive to the area near the jail where the phone had been purchased, hoping to see anything unusual. The car hummed softly as we left the driveway, the early evening light casting long shadows across the road. Do you think Brandon has someone on the outside helping him? I asked, keeping my eyes on the rearview mirror. It's possible, Charles answered. He has always had people who owed him favors. We pulled into a quiet parking lot behind a convenience store. The neon sign flickered, casting a pale glow on the pavement. I stepped out and inhaled the cool night air, noting the distant hum of traffic. Let's walk around and see if anyone seems out of place, Charles suggested. We moved slowly, scanning the lot and the nearby alley. A dark sedan idled near the exit, its engine low. I felt a prickle on the back of my neck. Did you see that? I whispered, nod toward Charles, my voice barely audible. He turned his head, eyes narrowing. Yes, that car has been there for a few minutes. Let's get closer. We approached cautiously, but as we neared, the vehicle pulled away smoothly, disappearing into the street. My pulse raced, and I felt a surge of frustration mixed with resolve. Whoever they are, they don't want us to see them, I said, trying to keep my tone even. Charles placed a reassuring hand on my arm. We have Eleanor on our side. She will find out who sent that text. We returned home, the house quiet except for the occasional creak of the old floorboards. I sat on the couch, my mind replaying the message and the fleeting sight of the sedan. Just as I was beginning to relax, the landline rang. I glanced at Charles, who frowned and picked up the receiver. Hello? He said, his voice steady. A calm voice came through the line. This is the clerk's office at the county courthouse. Mr. Hayes, we have received a notice of appeal from Mr. Brandon Hayes. He is requesting a new hearing based on new evidence. My breath caught. What kind of evidence? I asked. Though the question was directed at Charles, the clerk did not specify. The voice replied. They said it involves a document that was not previously submitted. I felt a cold wave wash over me, the fear from the text now mingling with a fresh dread. Thank you for letting us know, Charles said, his tone measured. We exchanged a look, the weight of the news settling between us. The phone clicked off, leaving us in the quiet room, the threat of another battle looming on the horizon. Who could be calling at this hour? I said, my hand hovering over the phone. The screen flashed an unknown number. I swallowed and pressed accept. A voice, low and uneasy, spoke from the other end. I have something you need to hear about Dr. Evans. My heart tightened. I glanced at Charles, who was reading the morning paper in the living room. Who is this? I asked, keeping my voice steady. The name is not important. I have a recording that shows the doctor was pressured to lie about your father's condition. I felt a chill creep up my spine. Where can I meet you? The old mill on Miller Road, tonight at 8. Come alone. The line went dead. I stared at the silent screen, thoughts racing. I turned to Charles, who lowered his paper. He looked at me with concern. Do you think it's a trap? He asked. I swallowed. It could be. But we cannot ignore any chance to expose the truth. He nodded, his jaw tight. We decided I would go, but he would wait nearby in case I needed help. Later that day, I met Charles at the edge of the woods near the mill. He stayed hidden among the trees while I approached the old stone building. The air smelled of damp earth and rusted metal. A figure stepped out from the shadows. A man in a dark coat, his face hidden beneath a hat. You brought no one else? He asked, voice barely above a whisper. I came alone as you asked, I replied, keeping my tone even. He handed me a small USB drive. This contains the original interview between Dr. Evans and Brandon. It shows the doctor being offered money to change his report. I took the drive, feeling its weight in my palm. Why are you doing this? I asked. He ruined my life. I worked for him for years. Then he fired me after I refused to falsify more reports. I want him to face the consequences. He turned and disappeared into the trees before I could ask more. I hurried back to where Charles waited. He stepped out from behind a trunk, his eyes scanning the woods. Did you get it? He asked. I nodded, holding up the drive. We need to get this to Eleanor right away, I said. We drove to her office in silence, the weight of the evidence heavy between us. When we arrived, Eleanor greeted us with a grave expression. She took the drive and inserted it into her laptop. The audio filled the small conference room. Brandon's voice, smooth and coercive, offering money to Dr. Evans in exchange for a statement that declared my father incapacitated. The doctor's reply was hesitant, then resigned, as if he felt trapped. Eleanor stopped the playback and looked at us. This confirms what we suspected. Brandon paid him to lie. I felt a wave of relief mixed with anger. But there is more. Eleanor continued. He sent a letter to the court yesterday, claiming he was coerced by us to give false testimony. My stomach tightened. That is a lie. She nodded. We need to get the doctor to retract that letter before the hearing. She picked up the phone and dialed Dr. Evans' office. After a few rings, a cautious voice answered. Dr. Evans, this is Eleanor Vance. We need to speak about the letter you sent to the court. There was a pause, then a sigh. I did not write that letter willingly, he said, his tone strained. Brandon threatened to expose a mistake I made years ago if I did not cooperate. I felt a surge of vindication, but Eleanor pressed further. Do you still have the original recordings of your conversations with Brandon? Yes, he replied. I kept them as protection. She asked him to bring the recordings to her office by the end of the day. He agreed, his voice trembling. We thanked him and ended the call. I felt a cautious hope rise. We spent the next hour preparing a motion to dismiss Brandon's appeal, attaching the new evidence. Eleanor promised to file it first thing in the morning. As we gathered our things, a sudden crash echoed from the hallway. The office door flew open, and two masked figures rushed in, shouting demands for the evidence. I shoved the USB drive into my pocket and shoved Eleanor behind a desk. One of the intruders grabbed my arm, trying to snatch the drive. I twisted free, feeling his grip slip as I kicked back. The other moved toward the laptop, but Eleanor slammed the laptop shut and shouted for help. The intruders hesitated, then fled through the back door, disappearing into the night. We were left breathing hard, the room in disarray. The drive was still safe in my pocket, but the sense of safety had shattered. I looked at Charles, his face pale but determined. We cannot let them win, he said, his voice low. I nodded, feeling the weight of the moment settle like stone in my chest. We called the police, gave them a description of the men, and waited for their arrival. Outside, The night air felt colder than before, the streetlights casting long shadows. I wondered what else Brandon might have planned, and whether we would ever truly be free of his reach. "I can't believe they took it," I said, my voice barely above a whisper as I stared at the open safe. Charles stepped closer, his hand resting on my shoulder. "We need to call Eleanor right away," he said, his tone low but urgent. I nodded, feeling the weight of the empty drawer where the hard drive had been. The security alarm had not triggered, which meant the intruder knew exactly where to look. I turned to the desk and picked up the phone, my fingers trembling as I dialed Eleanor's number. After a few rings, her voice came through, calm and steady. "Emily, what's wrong?" she asked. I swallowed hard before answering. Someone broke into the office and stole the drive with the recordings and the doctor's note. There was a brief pause on the line. "Are you sure nothing else was taken?" Eleanor inquired. I glanced around the room, noting that the laptop remained untouched. "Only the drive is missing," I replied. She sighed softly. "I will contact the police and start tracing any unusual activity. Stay inside, and do not touch anything else." I thanked her and hung up, the line going dead with a soft click. Charles moved to the window, pulling back the curtain to stare at the deserted street. "Who would know about that drive?" he muttered. I walked over and placed my hand on his arm. "Brandon has people watching us," I said, trying to keep my voice even. He turned to face me, his eyes dark. He must have suspected we were getting close. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. The thought that Brandon could still reach us from behind bars made the room feel smaller. We stood in silence for a moment, the only sound the faint hum of the refrigerator. Then my phone buzzed on the table, an unknown number flashing across the screen. I hesitated before answering, my heart pounding. "Hello?" I said, keeping my tone neutral. A low voice spoke, distorted as if through a changer. "You still want what's yours?" I frowned, trying to place the accent. "Who is this?" The voice chuckled softly. "Someone who has what you need. Meet me at the old mill tonight. Come alone." The line went dead before I could respond. I stared at the phone, my mind racing. The old mill was isolated, a place we had visited only once during our investigation. Charles looked at me, concern etched on his face. "Do you think it's a trap?" he asked. I shook my head, unsure. It could be our only chance to get the evidence back. He placed his palm flat on the table, his fingers spreading wide. "We cannot go alone. Eleanor would want to know. If we wait, the trail might go cold." I felt a surge of determination mixed with fear. The possibility of regaining the drive sparked a flicker of hope. Charles reached for his coat. "Let's tell Eleanor first. Then we can decide." I nodded, feeling the weight of the decision settle like stone in my chest. We walked to the door, Buddy trotting ahead of us, his tail wagging slightly, as if sensing our tension. Outside, the night air was cool, the streetlights casting long shadows on the pavement. We hurried to Eleanor's office, the building quiet at this hour. Eleanor opened the door herself, her hair pulled back in a loose bun. She looked tired, but alert. "What brings you here at this hour?" she asked, stepping aside to let us in. I held up the phone, showing her the missed call. "We received a threat, or maybe an offer," I said. She took the device, examining the screen. "An unknown number. This could be a ploy to lure you into a trap." Charles crossed his arms. "Or it could be genuine. Someone might have a copy of the drive." Eleanor walked to her desk and sat down, motioning for us to do the same. She opened her laptop and began typing quickly. "If this is real, we need to be careful," she said, her eyes never leaving the screen. "We could arrange a monitored meeting with officers nearby." I felt a small relief at the idea of protection. "What if they refuse to come forward unless we go alone?" I asked. She paused. Then we would have to weigh the risk. But we cannot act recklessly. The phone buzzed again with the same unknown number. I looked at Charles, then at Eleanor. Should we answer? She nodded. Answer, but do not reveal anything. I pressed accept and brought the phone to my ear. Hello? I said, keeping my voice steady. The same distorted voice replied. Bring the money. Bring it tonight. And you will get the drive. My stomach dropped. Money? We had no extra funds. I glanced at Charles, who shook his head slightly. I don't understand what money you mean, I said. The voice laughed softly. You know what I mean. The emergency cash. My eyes widened. How did they know about the emergency fund? I felt anger and fear. I will not pay a ransom for what is already mine, I said. Voice firmer now. The line went dead again. I lowered the phone, my hands shaking. Eleanor touched my shoulder. We will not give in to extortion. We will find another way. Charles spoke up, resolute. We will increase security and wait for a mistake. I looked out the window at the dark street, feeling the weight of the situation. The night stretched ahead, uncertain and cold. But a stubborn spark refused to go out. Stay close, I murmured, eyes scanning the deserted lot. The rusted gate groaned as I pushed it open, my boots scraping on broken gravel. A thin veil of fog clung to the ground, muffling distant traffic. After a moment, I felt Charles shift beside me, his hand brushing mine in a silent signal. You sure about this? He asked. Voice low enough that only I could hear. I trust the source, I replied, keeping my gaze fixed on the shadowed warehouse ahead. He said he'd be waiting near the loading dock. We moved forward, staying low behind stacks of pallets. The smell of oil and damp wood filled my nostrils, reminding me of nights spent stakeouts during our first investigation. My heart hammered, not from fear but from the sharp edge of hope cutting through weeks of dread. A figure emerged from the darkness, leaning against a metal column. He wore a worn baseball cap pulled low, his jacket zipped to the chin. As we approached, he lifted his chin, revealing a face marked by a thin scar along the jawline. You're Hayes? He asked, tone flat but eyes sharp. Yes, Charles said, stepping slightly ahead of me. You said you have the drive. He chuckled, a short sound that held no humor. I have more than a drive. I have proof Brandon paid me to break into Vance's office. I copied everything before handing it over. He pulled a small USB stick from his pocket and held it out. Consider this a peace offering. I reached out, fingers brushing his. The metal was cold against my skin. Why help us now? I asked, keeping my voice steady. Brandon screwed me over, he said, jaw tightening. Promised a cut, then vanished when the heat came. I want him to feel the same helplessness he gave others. Charles glanced at me, then back at the informant. Can we trust this? He murmured. I weighed the words, the man's tense posture, the way his eyes flicked to the warehouse doors every few seconds. If he's lying, we'll know soon enough, I answered. But the copy could be our lifeline. He nodded, slipping the USB into his palm. Then we moved fast. Brandon's men patrol the perimeter every 20 minutes. We slip back through the gate, the night air wrapping around us like a shroud. Once inside our car, I turned the key, the engine purring to life. Charles placed the USB on the console, its plastic casing catching the dashboard light. What's on it? He asked, curiosity warring with caution. Everything Brandon thought he erased, I said, feeling a surge of determination. Financial logs, emails with Dr. Evans, the security footage from his own office. I glanced at the rearview mirror, noting the empty street behind us. A promise formed in my mind. We would turn this evidence into justice, no matter how many obstacles lay ahead. The car eased onto the main road, tires humming against wet asphalt. After a few miles, Charles spoke, his voice softer than before. You did well back there, he said. I was scared we'd walk into a trap. I smiled, feeling the tension in my shoulders ease just a fraction. We make a good team, I replied. Now let's see what this drive holds. We arrived at Eleanor's office just as the clock struck 10. The building stood quiet, its lights dimmed except for a soft glow from the second-floor window. Eleanor opened the door herself, her hair pulled back in a tight braid, her expression a mix of fatigue and alertness. "What brings you at this hour?" she asked, stepping aside to let us in. I held up the USB, feeling its weight in my palm. "We have something you need to see," I said, keeping my tone steady. She took it, plugging it into her laptop. Lines of code scrolled across the screen before a folder opened, revealing files labeled with dates and names we recognized. Eleanor's eyes narrowed as she opened an audio file. A voice filled the room, low and deliberate, unmistakably Brandon's. "I need the evaluation to say he's incapacitated. Make it convincing, and I'll make sure you're compensated." My stomach twisted, not from fear but from the stark clarity of hearing his own words admit the scheme. Eleanor glanced at me, her expression grim. "He's been bribing Evans for months," she said. "This is the proof we needed to crush his appeal." Charles leaned forward, his hands resting on the desk. "What's our next move?" he asked. "We file a motion to dismiss immediately," Eleanor replied, fingers flying over the keyboard. "We'll also submit this audio as evidence of coercion. Brandon's house of cards is about to fall." I felt a flicker of relief, but a sudden creak from the hallway made us all glance toward the door. Shadows shifted under the door jamb, suggesting movement beyond. "Did you hear that?" Charles whispered, hand instinctively moving toward his pocket where his phone lay. Eleanor rose, her expression hardening. "Stay here," she commanded, voice firm. "I'll check." She slipped out, closing the door softly behind her. The room fell silent, except for the faint hum of the laptop fan. I pressed my back against the cool wood of the desk, ears straining for any sign of danger. After what felt like an eternity, the door opened again. Eleanor returned, her face pale, but composed. "It's clear," she said. "Just the building settling. No one there." I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. The tension eased, but a new resolve settled in my chest. We had the evidence. We just needed to present it. "We'll meet at the courthouse tomorrow morning," Eleanor said, sliding the USB back to me. "Bring this with you. We'll have the judge see exactly what Brandon tried to hide." Charles stood, offering his hand to help me up. "Thank you," I said, gripping his forearm firmly, "for believing in me." He nodded, his grip strong. "We're in this together." As we stepped back into the night, the fog had lifted, revealing a sky streaked with the first hints of dawn. Buddy trotted ahead of us, his tail wagging with a carefree energy that contrasted sharply with the weight we carried. I glanced at Charles, feeling a quiet certainty rise within me. No matter what Brandon threw at us next, we now held the truth in our hands. A low hum vibrated through the wooden bench as I sat waiting. The courtroom smelled of polished wood and faint antiseptic, a scent that made my throat tighten. Charles sat beside me, his hands folded tightly on his lap. Eleanor Vance sat forward, her eyes scanning the bench with steady focus. The bailiff called for order, and the judge took his seat, his robe brushing the wood with a soft whisper. "Please state your name for the record," the judge said, his voice calm but firm. I cleared my throat and answered, "Emily Hayes." The judge nodded and turned to Charles. "And you, sir?" "Charles Hayes," he replied, his voice low but steady. Eleanor rose, her folder held tightly. "Your Honor, we bring new evidence that directly contradicts the respondent's claim of incapacity." The judge leaned forward, fingertips touching. "Let us hear it." Eleanor opened the folder and slid a USB drive across the bench. This drive contains a complete copy of the data that was taken from my office last week. It includes an audio recording in which Brandon Hayes admits to bribing Dr. Evans to falsify a capacity evaluation. A murmur rose from the gallery. I felt the bench vibrate slightly as the murmur grew. The judge held up a hand for silence. He inserted the drive into the courtroom's player. A soft click filled the room, then a voice filled the speakers. Brandon's voice, sharp and impatient. "You need to make it look like he can't handle his own affairs," Brandon said on the recording. "Give him a diagnosis that sticks. I'll take care of the rest." The courtroom fell still. Even the rustle of paper seemed to pause. I felt a chill slide down my spine. Not from fear, but from the sudden clarity of the lie laid bare. Eleanor continued. "This recording was made in Dr. Evans's office on the 3rd of March. It was recorded without his knowledge, but the authenticity has been verified by an independent forensic analyst." The judge turned to the prosecution's table. "Do you have any objection to the admissibility of this recording?" The prosecutor shook his head. "No objection, Your Honor. The chain of custody is intact." The judge nodded and turned his gaze to Brandon, who sat stiffly, his eyes fixed on the floor. "Mr. Hayes, you have heard the recording. Do you wish to respond?" Brandon lifted his head, his jaw tight. "That recording was tampered with. I never said those words." Eleanor lifted another sheet. "We also have the original financial records showing the transfer of $30,000 from Charles Hayes's account to an account under Brandon Hayes's name, dated the day before the cruise deposit was made." She slid a printed statement across the bench. The numbers were clear, the timestamps exact. I saw Charles's hand tighten on the armrest, his knuckles whitening. The judge examined the document, then looked back at Brandon. "Mr. Hayes, you have been accused of fraud, conspiracy, and elder abuse. How do you plead?" Brandon's voice cracked. "Not guilty." The judge rose slowly, his robe whispering. "After reviewing the evidence presented, I find the respondent guilty of fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, and exploitation of an elderly adult. The petition for guardianship is denied. All assets improperly transferred are to be returned to the estate of Charles Hayes. The respondent is sentenced to 24 months in federal prison, with restitution to be determined. End of lesson. Of lesh. End. A murmur rose again, this time a mixture of relief and disbelief. I felt a warmth spread through my chest, not from triumph, but from the release of a weight I had carried for months. Charles turned to me, his eyes soft. "We did it," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the rustle of papers. I nodded, my throat tight. "We did." Eleanor gathered her papers, a faint smile touching her lips. "Now we make sure the trust is funded and the charitable fund moves forward." The bailiff approached Brandon, placing a hand on his arm. Brandon stood, his shoulders slumped, and was led away without a word. I watched him go, the echo of his steps fading down the hallway. Outside the courtroom, sunlight poured through the tall windows, painting the marble floor with gold. I inhaled deeply, the air crisp and fragrant with distant blossoms. Charles placed a hand on my shoulder, his grip firm, but gentle. "Let's go home," he said. I turned to him, my eyes meeting his. "Yes, let's go home." With steady footsteps, we walked out of the courthouse, the rhythm of our hopes now matching the world around us. We walked out together, the echo of our steps matching the steady beat of hope that had finally found its rhythm. The sun warmed the marble steps as we approached the car, and Charles leaned against the door, his hand resting lightly on the roof. I opened the passenger side for him, feeling the familiar weight of his trust settle into my palm. He settled in, and I slipped behind the wheel, the engine humming low like a quiet promise. I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw my own face softer, the lines that had tightened over months easing as the light caught the corners of my eyes. A small notebook lay tucked in my bag, its cover frayed from use. I pulled it out, flipped to a blank page, and wrote a single line in ink that smelled of rain. I closed the book, set it on the seat beside him, and pulled onto the street that curved toward the river trail. The trees swayed, their leaves whispering as we drove, and the city's noise fell behind us like a curtain drawn. I eased the car to a stop under the old oak where we had once sat after long afternoons, its branches spreading wide over the grass. I reached for the notebook again, opened it, read the line I had written, then tore the page free. The wind took it, sending it fluttering over the lawn, twisting and turning until it caught on a low branch and swayed there, a white speck against green. I watched it dance, feeling the weight I had carried loosen with each flutter. I left the notebook open on the seat, its empty pages waiting for whoever might need to fill them. I started the engine again and drove home, the road ahead stretching steady and sure. We walked out together, the echo of our steps matching the steady beat of hope that had finally found its rhythm. The sun warmed the marble steps as we approached the car, and Charles leaned against the door, his hand resting lightly on the roof. I opened the passenger side for him, feeling the familiar weight of his trust settle into my palm. He settled in, and I slipped behind the wheel, the engine humming low like a quiet promise. I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw my own face softer, the lines that had tightened over months easing as the light caught the corners of my eyes. A small notebook lay tucked in my bag, its cover frayed from use. I pulled it out, flipped to a blank page, and wrote a single line in ink that smelled of rain. I closed the book, set it on the seat beside him, and pulled onto the street that curved toward the river trail. The trees swayed, their leaves whispering as we drove, and the city's noise fell behind us like a curtain drawn. I eased the car to a stop under the old oak where we had once sat after long afternoons, its branches spreading wide over the grass. I reached for the notebook again, opened it, read the line I had written, then tore the page free. The wind took it, sending it fluttering over the lawn, twisting and turning until it caught on a low branch and swayed there, a white speck against green. I watched it dance, feeling the weight I had carried loosen with each flutter. I left the notebook open on the seat, its empty pages waiting for whoever might need to fill them. I started the engine again and drove home, the road ahead stretching steady and sure.